Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had been falling since morning, a steady curtain that blurred the edges of the forest road. Thomas kept both hands tight on the steering wheel as his headlights swept across the endless pines. The forest looked alive under the storm, branches bending and whispering like they were keeping secrets. He was headed to Ravenwood Lodge, an old building tucked deep in the woods. His friend Sarah had invited him, along with a small group of others, to spend the weekend there. Supposedly, the lodge had once been a hunting retreat back in the early 1900s, but it hadn't been used in years. As Thomas turned down the final dirt road, mud splashed up around his tires. The rain drummed harder against the roof of his car, drowning out the faint music of the radio. Through the sheets of water, the outline of the lodge appeared, tall, dark, and half hidden among towering fir trees. Its windows were black, like eyes watching from the shadows. A flicker of light caught his attention. Just ahead, near the entrance, someone had already built a campfire under the shelter of a stone overhang. The flames licked the wet air, crackling against the storm. Figures stood around it, their shapes warped by the rain and smoke. Thomas parked, killed the engine, and stepped out into the downpour. His boots sank into soft earth, water soaking through his jeans in seconds. Sarah waved from the fire, her smile warm but strangely tense. "Made it," she called. "I was starting to think the forest would keep you." Her words lingered in his mind as thunder rolled across the hills. The forest did feel like it wanted to keep him, and something in the lodge's shadowed windows made him wonder if Sarah's joke wasn't entirely a joke at all. The weekend had only just begun, but the rain carried more than water. It carried whispers. Thomas stepped closer to the campfire, letting the heat lick at his rain-soaked skin. The flames hissed every time a drop of water fell from the overhang above, yet the fire held strong, stubborn against the storm. The group gathered their turn toward him, their faces flickering in and out of shadow. Sarah moved first, giving him a damp hug. Her jacket was wet, her hair pulled back, strands sticking to her cheeks. There was comfort in her presence, but also something unspoken, like she was holding back words she didn't want to say just yet. "This is everyone?" Thomas asked, his voice raised over the hiss of the fire and the pounding rain. "Almost," Sarah said. She gestured toward the others. "You know Mark, right? He drove up with me. And this is Rachel and Tyler. 2 more are supposed to arrive tonight, but with the weather..." She glanced toward the forest road, where rain turned everything into a sheet of gray. "They might be late." Each face nodded in greeting, though none of them smiled for long. Thomas noticed how their eyes kept drifting toward the lodge behind them. The massive building loomed in the darkness, its wooden walls dark with age, its roof heavy with water sliding down in streams. A single lantern burned by the entrance, swaying slightly with each gust of wind. The fire crackled, filling the silence. For a moment, Thomas tried to push away his unease. He crouched by the flames, stretching out his hands. The heat stung, but it was a relief. The smell of burning wood mingled with the dampness of rain-soaked soil, a smell that reminded him of camping trips long ago. Tyler broke the silence. "You hear it?" Everyone turned toward him. The firelight caught his sharp features, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He wasn't smiling. "Hear what?" Thomas asked. "The forest," Tyler said. He tilted his head, his expression tightening. "It's too quiet. Even with the rain, no birds, no frogs, nothing." Thomas listened. The rain was loud, relentless, but now that Tyler had pointed it out, he realized the truth. The forest should have been alive with sound, croaks, chirps, the restless stir of creatures moving through underbrush. Instead, it was only rain, fire, and the occasional groan of wind sliding through the trees. Rachel gave a soft laugh, though it sounded forced. "It's the storm. Animals hide when it's like this." "Maybe," Tyler muttered, though his eyes didn't leave the dark tree line. Sarah clapped her hands together, too loud, like she wanted to break whatever mood had settled. "Come on. Let's get inside before we're drenched through. The fire's good, but we're going to freeze if we stay out here all night." Thomas glanced at the lodge again. The building's tall frame seemed even darker now that he had to step closer. The lantern by the door swayed again, creaking faintly. For the briefest second, Thomas thought he saw a shape move behind one of the upstairs windows. A pale shift, gone as quickly as it appeared. He blinked, rain dripping from his lashes. The window was empty, black, the reflection of firelight dancing across it. Sarah led the way, pulling open the heavy wooden door. The hinges moaned like something long asleep forced awake. A draft of air spilled out, carrying with it the smell of old wood, dust, and something else beneath it, damp, sour like the memory of rock. The group hesitated at the threshold, firelight behind them, shadows ahead. One by one they stepped inside. As Thomas crossed the doorway, the rain's noise dulled, muffled by the thick lodge walls. The fire outside crackled faintly, but inside the silence returned, heavy, waiting, almost alive. The door shut behind them with a thud, sealing them in. And the forest kept its silence. The air inside the lodge was colder than Thomas expected. The moment the heavy door shut, the group was swallowed by a chill that seemed to rise from the very floorboards. The rain outside became a muffled roar, distant and unreachable, yet the silence inside felt sharper, as though the building itself were holding its breath. Thomas brushed droplets from his jacket and looked around. The entryway was vast, stretching up into a shadowed ceiling of exposed beams. Dust drifted faintly in the lantern light as Sarah held the flame higher, revealing antlers mounted on the walls, their sharp points throwing jagged shadows across the wood. Old rugs lay curled at the corners, water-stained and dark with age. It smelled of damp timber, of mildew creeping through the grain, and underneath it all was something faintly metallic, a scent Thomas couldn't place but didn't like. Mark set down his bag with a sigh, his voice breaking the silence. Still standing. Not bad for a place left empty this long. Rachel tilted her head, frowning. Are we sure it's empty? Everyone looked at her. She shrugged, but her voice lowered. I mean, you felt that, right? It doesn't feel empty. No one answered. Tyler gave a low chuckle, though it didn't sound genuine. It feels old, that's all. Places like this, they keep echoes. That's what you're feeling. Sarah set the lantern on a wooden table by the door. The flames swayed, painting the walls with restless light. Well, let's make it feel less like a tomb and more like a cabin. Firewood should be stocked near the hearth. The group moved into the main hall. Thomas followed, his boots creaking on the warped planks. Every sound echoed strangely, as if the rooms were too big, too hollow, stretching their noises further than they should. The main hall was massive, lined with tall windows that rattled faintly under the push of the storm. The stone fireplace sat cold and black at the far end, a pile of split logs waiting beside it. Dust covered the mantel, but someone, maybe one of Sarah's earlier visits, had swept enough space for kindling. Tyler crouched by the hearth, striking a match. Soon, firelight licked upward, throwing gold and orange across the walls. Shadows bent and swayed, and for the first time, warmth began to chase back the cold. The group gathered closer. The flames popped and hissed as water evaporated from the old wood. Rain tapped the windows in endless rhythm, and the storm beyond pressed against the glass like a restless hand. Thomas lowered himself into a chair that sagged under his weight. So, Sarah? He asked. Why here? Of all places. Sarah's face softened in the firelight, though she avoided his eyes. My uncle owned this place once. It's been abandoned for decades, but I don't know. I thought it would be different. A place to get away from everything. No phones, no noise, just us. Rachel let out a quiet laugh. No noise is right. Even the forest feels like it's holding back. Mark leaned forward, tossing another log onto the fire. Old places have stories. Probably nothing more than hunters' tales and ghost rumors. I'm sure we'll hear plenty before the weekend's over. At the word ghost, the fire popped sharply, a spark leaping high before dying in the air. Tyler froze, staring into the flames, his mouth set in a hard line. Thomas noticed. What? Tyler shook his head slowly. Nothing. Just thought I heard something in the chimney. The group went silent, listening. The fire crackled, the rain hammered, and for a long moment, nothing else came. Then, faintly, so faint Thomas thought he imagined it, came a sound from above. A scrape. Like nails dragging against stone. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Probably just an animal. Bats maybe. Sarah forced a smile. Exactly. This place has been empty forever. It's bound to have wildlife inside. Nothing more. But Thomas glanced at the flames again, and he wasn't so sure. The shadows along the walls seemed to lean closer, as if the lodge itself were listening. And somewhere above, the faint scraping continued. The fire grew stronger, warming the room in uneven waves. Shadows stretched tall across the walls, flickering as if alive, twisting in ways that made Thomas uneasy if he stared too long. The storm outside was relentless, rain hammering against the tall windows, thunder rolling like distant drums through the hills. The group spread out across the main hall, each choosing a chair or a spot on the rug before the hearth. Their voices rose in casual talk, small jokes, half-hearted laughter. But beneath it all, silence pressed from the walls, thick and waiting. Thomas leaned back in his chair, listening. The scraping noise from the chimney had stopped, or maybe it had only grown quiet enough to hide beneath the fire's crackle. Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was inside this building with them, something that had been here long before their arrival. Sarah busied herself with her bag, pulling out a thermos and cups. Tea. Might help us warm up. The smell of herbs drifted into the air, almost masking the dampness of old wood. Almost. Rachel sat cross-legged near the fire, her gaze locked on the flames. She hadn't spoken much since they entered, and her expression seemed distant, her eyes reflecting the orange glow. Tyler noticed. "You okay?" he asked. Rachel blinked as if waking from a dream. "Yeah. I don't know. I keep thinking I see something moving in the windows." Everyone turned, glancing at the tall glass panes. Rain streamed down them in thick rivers, the storm outside twisting reflections into shapes that could easily fool the eye. The blackness of the forest pressed close, broken only when lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the trees for the briefest second. Sarah gave a nervous laugh. "Reflections, that's all. Nothing out there but trees." Rachel didn't answer. She sipped her tea and kept her eyes lowered. Mark stretched, his chair creaking. "Look, it's our first night. Let's not start creeping ourselves out already. This is supposed to be fun, remember? Storm, fire, stories, that's what this place is for." "Stories?" Thomas asked. Mark's grin returned. "Sure. Places like this practically beg for them. Old lodge, middle of nowhere, no phones, no neighbors. Perfect setting." Tyler raised a brow. "You mean ghost stories?" Mark shrugged. "Or worse." The fire popped loudly, making Sarah flinch. The sound seemed to echo too much, like the room wanted to hold on to it. Rachel's voice was quiet when she spoke again. "There's a story about this place." The group turned toward her. The storm deepened, thunder rolling overhead like an answer. Rachel's eyes glimmered in the firelight. "I read about it before we came. Ravenwood Lodge. It was a hunting retreat, but hunters weren't the only ones who came here. People said the lodge drew others, people who wanted to disappear. Not everyone who came here was seen again." The room fell into stillness. The fire hissed as a wet log burned through, filling the silence. Sarah shook her head quickly. "Rumors. Old newspapers exaggerating. Nothing more." But Rachel didn't look convinced. "They found journals here once. Pages describing strange sounds in the forest at night, shadows watching from the trees. And worse things. Things that scratched at the windows. Things that wanted in." Lightning flashed, illuminating the lodge in stark white for a single heartbeat. Every shadow froze sharp against the walls. For that instant, Thomas thought he saw movement in the reflection of the window, a figure standing outside, its outline blurred by rain. The light vanished. Darkness returned. Nothing was there. He swallowed hard. The others seemed uneasy too, though no one said a word. The fire burned, the rain pounded, and the silence inside grew heavier, like the building was listening to every breath they took. Sarah cleared her throat, her voice brittle. "It's just a story. Nothing to it." But Thomas couldn't shake the image of that shadow in the lightning. And deep in the chimney, so faint he almost doubted it, came that sound again. The scrape of nails on stone. The fire crackled low, casting long, restless shadows across the beams overhead. The group lingered close to the hearth, the warmth their only shield against the chill that seemed to seep from the very bones of the lodge. The storm outside raged harder, each gust of wind rattling the tall windows and sending streaks of water sliding down the glass. Thomas couldn't stop glancing at the chimney. The scraping noise had faded again, but the thought of it unsettled him. The image of something clawing slowly down through stone, patient and deliberate. Tyler sat with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the windows. His jaw was tight, and he hadn't spoken since Rachel's story. Mark, perhaps trying to break the silence, leaned forward in his chair. "All right. If we're stuck here with no internet, no signal, and no TV, then we do what people used to do." Rachel raised a brow. "And what's that?" "Tell stories," Mark said. He gave a lopsided grin. "Scare each other until we can't sleep." Sarah groaned softly, shaking her head. "That's exactly what we don't need. Not tonight." But Mark only chuckled. "Come on, Sarah. Look around us. A hunting lodge in the middle of nowhere. A fire burning in the storm. This is begging for ghost stories." Tyler's voice broke in, sharp and flat. "We don't need ghost stories. We've got the real thing." Everyone turned toward him. The firelight danced across his face, carving harsh lines into his features. "What do you mean?" Thomas asked carefully. Tyler didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted toward the windows again, then to the high rafters above. Places like this don't stay empty for decades without a reason. Sarah forced a laugh, but it trembled. It's because it's old, Tyler. Falling apart. Nobody wants to pay to keep it up. Then why does it feel, Tyler said, his voice low, like someone's still here? The group went silent. The storm outside howled louder, the rain lashing against the roof in sheets. Somewhere deep within the lodge, a floorboard creaked, slow and heavy as if under a step. Thomas's heart gave a hard beat. He scanned the dark corners of the hall, but the firelight didn't reach far enough. Beyond its circle, the lodge was drowned in shadows. Rachel's hands tightened around her cup. Did anyone hear that? Mark started to speak, then froze as another sound followed, faint but distinct. A whisper. It drifted from the far hall, too soft to make out words, but close enough to raise the hair on Thomas's arms. Sarah shot to her feet. Stop. It's the storm. Just the storm. But Thomas wasn't so sure. The whisper hadn't sounded like wind. It had sounded like a voice, dry and low, moving through the walls. He stood too, glancing toward the dark corridor that led deeper into the lodge. His reflection caught in the tall window by the fire, pale and uneasy. But for an instant he thought there was another shape standing just behind him in the glass. He turned sharply. Nothing but the group and the fire. The whisper faded. The silence returned, heavier than before. Mark forced a laugh, though it was too loud, too nervous. See? That's the lodge joining in on the fun. We've got the perfect setting. This place wants us to tell stories. Or it wants to tell its own, Rachel murmured. The fire snapped loudly, throwing sparks. And in the far corridor, beyond the reach of light, something shifted in the dark, the faint shuffle of footsteps on old wood. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. A shuffle like weight dragging across wooden planks. It moved once, then stopped, as if whoever, or whatever, made it had paused, listening. The group froze. No one spoke. Even the fire seemed quieter, the only sound the steady thrum of rain hammering the tall windows. Thomas's throat went dry. His eyes flicked toward the corridor, its yawning black mouth stretching away from the firelight. The lantern Sarah had set down on the table threw a weak glow, but it didn't reach that far. The darkness there felt alive, as if it was swallowing light on purpose. Rachel's voice trembled. That wasn't the storm. Sarah swallowed hard and forced herself to move. She grabbed the lantern from the table, the flame wobbling as she held it high. Old houses creak, she said quickly, her voice too fast, too rehearsed. The wind pushes on the walls, the boards settle. It's nothing more than that. But no one believed her. Mark stood, squaring his shoulders. Well, let's prove it. No sense sitting here and letting our imaginations turn shadows into monsters. Thomas wanted to agree, but his body didn't move. Something about that corridor made him feel like crossing its threshold would change everything, like the darkness was waiting for him to step in. Tyler's voice was low, flat. You shouldn't go down there. Mark gave him a sharp look. Why not? Tyler didn't answer right away. He stared at the corridor as though he could see through the blackness, as though he already knew what was hiding in it. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet. Because some doors don't want to be opened. The lantern light flickered, as if reacting to his words. A gust of air moved through the hall, faint but cold, carrying with it the smell of damp earth, like soil freshly turned, wet and raw. Sarah tightened her grip on the lantern. I'll just look. Just for a second. Before anyone could stop her, she stepped forward, the light trembling across the floorboards as she moved toward the corridor. The others followed reluctantly. Thomas's legs felt heavy, but the thought of staying behind in the vast, dim hall was worse. The fire at their backs gave off a false sense of safety, and with each step closer to the dark corridor, the warmth seemed to fade. The lantern cast long shadows down the hall, revealing faded wallpaper peeling in strips, framed pictures tilted on nails, glass cracked and warped. Dust clung to the corners. The air was colder here, carrying the sharp bite of mildew. See, Sarah said, her voice hushed but strained. Nothing but. The sound came again. Closer this time. A dragging shuffle. Then silence. Rachel let out a quiet gasp, pressing closer to Thomas. He felt her trembling through his sleeve. Mark took another step, his jaw tight. If it's an animal, we'll scare it off. But Thomas wasn't convinced it was an animal. The sound hadn't been frantic or skittering like claws. It had been steady, intentional. The lantern's glow fell on something at the far end of the corridor. A door, swollen with water damage, its paint cracked and curling. The sound seemed to come from beyond it, like something moving slowly on the other side. Tyler stopped in his tracks. Don't. Sarah looked back at him. Don't what? Don't open it. His voice carried such weight that even Mark hesitated. The group stood in silence, the storm outside raging against the windows. The fire popped faintly behind them, too far away now to feel comforting. The dragging sound came once more, but this time it ended with a thud. A slow, deliberate knock against the door at the corridor's end. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, like someone asking to be let in. The lantern shook in Sarah's hands, and the lodge seemed to lean closer, listening. The 3 knocks hung in the silence like a heartbeat. Even the storm outside seemed to pause, thunder rumbling low in the distance but not breaking through. The group stood frozen in the corridor, the lantern trembling in Sarah's hands, its glow wobbling against the walls. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. The knocks had been too precise, too human. Not an animal, not the house shifting. Someone, or something, was on the other side of that door. Rachel whispered, "Please tell me someone else heard that." No one answered. They had all heard it. The door at the end of the corridor loomed in the lantern light, swollen and warped with age, its surface peeling like old skin. The brass knob, tarnished green, reflected the faintest shimmer of flame. Mark swallowed hard, forcing bravado back into his voice. Old wood swells, air moves through gaps. It could be anything. "No," Tyler said firmly, his voice low and steady. "That was a knock. And whatever knocks wants an answer." Sarah took an unsteady step back. Her knuckles were white where she clutched the lantern. "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't even." A sudden gust rattled the entire corridor, making the frames on the walls shake against plaster. One of them slipped, glass shattering against the floor. The sound echoed sharp, unnaturally loud, bouncing down the length of the hallway until it seemed to vanish into the walls themselves. The group flinched. Rachel let out a soft cry and grabbed Thomas's arm. He could feel the tremor in her grip, and though he wanted to comfort her, his own pulse hammered too hard in his ears. Mark tried to recover, bending quickly to pick up the broken frame. He brushed shards aside and glanced at the picture inside. His face paled. "What is it?" Thomas asked. Mark hesitated, then held it up. The photograph was black and white, old, its surface warped by moisture. It showed a group of men standing in front of the lodge. Their clothes were heavy hunting coats, their faces hard and distant. But something about the image made Thomas's stomach turn, not because of the hunters but because of the shadow that stretched behind them. A tall, thin shape, blurred and out of place, as though it hadn't belonged in the picture but had been caught by accident. Rachel's voice cracked. "That wasn't there before." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "I saw pictures when I researched this place," Rachel said quickly. "Online archives. This same photograph. The hunters, the lodge. But that," she jabbed a finger at the shadow, "that wasn't in the copy I saw." The corridor seemed to grow colder, each word sinking deeper into the silence. From behind the door came another sound. Not knocks this time. A slow, dragging scrape like fingernails sliding down wood. The noise made the lantern flame flutter violently, nearly going out. Tyler stepped forward, his face tense, his voice low but clear. "We leave it shut. Whatever's in there stays in there." Mark looked torn, bravado slipping into unease. "And if it's just a raccoon or something? We can't let a wild animal tear the place apart." But no one moved. No one wanted to touch the door. Sarah's hands shook so badly she had to set the lantern on a table by the wall. The flame wavered but held. We'll deal with it in the morning, when it's light. Right now we need to go back to the fire. Please." Thunder cracked outside, rattling the glass in the windows. The sound of rain grew heavier, a drumming that seemed to press against the building, as though the storm itself wanted inside. The group began to retreat slowly, step by step, back toward the warmth of the main hall. Thomas kept his eyes locked on the swollen door at the corridor's end, half expecting it to swing open on its own. But it didn't. It only sat there, heavy and waiting. The lantern light grew smaller as they pulled away. The hall behind them filled again with shadows, swallowing the picture frames, the peeling wallpaper, the broken glass on the floor. And just before the darkness claimed the far door completely, Thomas thought he saw the knob twitch, a faint turn like someone testing it from the other side. He blinked. The darkness swallowed it whole. Back in the main hall, the fire was still burning, but its glow no longer felt welcoming. It threw wild, restless shadows across the walls, the flames spitting sparks like warnings. The group settled in tight around it, no one speaking for several minutes. The only sounds were the rain against the windows and the occasional groan of the old beams above them. Finally, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. What if it doesn't wait until morning? No one answered. The lodge creaked softly like it was listening. The storm showed no signs of easing. Rain hammered the roof of the lodge, dripping through the broken guttering and forming dark pools on the porch. Inside, the old wood groaned as though the house were breathing with the weather. The group had gathered in the main lounge, where Sarah had coaxed a reluctant fire into life. It burned low, throwing soft orange light across the worn armchairs and the mounted deer head that hung above the mantel. The smell of wet clothes, smoke, and damp pine filled the room. Thomas sat close to the flames, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The fire was comforting, but the way shadows stretched along the log walls made him uneasy. They didn't move like normal shadows. Sometimes they seemed to twitch just a second too late, like they were trying to keep up with the people casting them. "You hear it too, right?" Mark asked suddenly. Everyone turned. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the crackle of the fire. "Hear what?" Sarah asked. "The voices," Mark said. His eyes darted toward the rain-smeared windows. "Out in the trees, like someone's whispering when the wind blows. I've been hearing it since dusk." A silence stretched across the group. Thomas swallowed hard. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but he'd noticed it too. Not words exactly, more like murmurs, faint and wet, slipping in between the raindrops whenever the forest shifted. "That's just the storm," Sarah said quickly, forcing a laugh. "Wind plays tricks. This place is old, it creaks and carries sound." But her voice lacked conviction. The fire popped, sending a burst of sparks into the air. Everyone flinched. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Thomas leaned back, staring into the flames. He thought of the shape he had glimpsed earlier near the tree-line. A figure, or perhaps just the memory of one. The whispers hadn't followed him alone. "Do you know the history of this place?" Mark asked suddenly, his tone sharper than before. Sarah hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the mounted deer head above the fireplace, then to the rain-streaked windows. Finally she sighed. "There are stories," she admitted, "about the hunters who built this lodge. Some say they didn't just hunt animals out here. Some say," she trailed off, her face pale in the firelight. "Say what?" Thomas pressed. "That they started hunting each other." The words landed heavy in the silence. Even the storm seemed to hush, as if the forest itself wanted to hear. A log collapsed in the fireplace, sending up another hiss of sparks. The shadows twisted against the walls, curling and stretching like they were alive. And in that instant, Thomas swore he heard it again. A whisper carried through the rain. But this time it was clear. It called his name. The sound of his name lingered in Thomas's mind like an echo trapped in a cave. At first, he told himself it was only imagination, the tired trick of nerves worn thin by the storm and the flicker of firelight. But when he glanced around the room, he saw that Sarah had stiffened, Mark was staring wide-eyed at the windows, and even Daniel, who had dozed off in a chair, sat upright as if something had jolted him awake. "You all heard that, didn't you?" Thomas asked, his voice unsteady. For a moment no one answered. Then Sarah whispered, "It said your name." The words pressed against him harder than the storm pressing against the glass. The fire snapped loudly, making them all jump, and a gust of wind rattled the shutters as though mocking their fear. Mark stood and moved toward the window, careful with every step as though he expected something on the other side to lunge through at him. He cupped his hands to the glass and peered into the black curtain of rain. "Nothing," he muttered. "Just trees. Just darkness." But the way his shoulders stayed tight told Thomas he didn't believe his own words. Daniel rubbed his face, his hands trembling slightly. I thought I was dreaming. But it wasn't a dream. Something called him." Sarah's fire struggled to burn higher as she poked at it with the iron rod. Her movements were fast, nervous, as if keeping the flames alive could somehow keep the whispers out. Thomas, though, couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers weren't outside anymore. They were here, pressing up against the walls, sliding between the gaps in the wood, curling into the smoke. He felt them circling the group the way predators circled prey. He swallowed hard. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe the lodge is carrying sound weird. "Don't lie to yourself," Mark snapped. His voice cracked under the weight of fear. "That wasn't the wind. That was something that knows us." The fire cracked again, louder this time, as though in agreement. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the steady hiss of rain on the roof and the deep groans of the old wood shifting. Sarah sat back, clutching the poker like a weapon. The firelight flickered over her face, and Thomas thought she looked smaller than usual, diminished by something unseen. "We can't go outside in this storm," Daniel said, his voice low. "But we can't stay here either, can we?" Not if it keeps talking. Sarah looked at him, then at Thomas, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. The lodge has an upstairs. Maybe we'll feel safer higher up, away from the ground. Or trapped, Mark muttered. But they all knew they couldn't sit in the lounge forever. Every second by the fire felt like waiting for something to find them. Reluctantly, Sarah led the way with the fire poker in hand. They climbed the narrow staircase, its steps whining under their weight. The upstairs hall stretched long and crooked, lined with closed doors. The wallpaper peeled in strips, and the air smelled musty, carrying the faint tang of wet wood and dust. Each door looked the same, old, warped by time, some with faded numbers carved into them. The shadows clung thicker up here, the glow of the downstairs fire unable to reach. As they walked, Thomas's stomach tightened. It was quieter than it had been downstairs, the rain muffled by the upper walls. Quieter, except for something soft. A hush, a murmur. He froze. It was a voice again. Not outside. Not in the storm. This time it was just behind the nearest door. It didn't call his name. It was laughing. The night pressed in close around Ravenwood Lodge, heavy with the hiss of falling rain. The fire outside had long since burned low, smothered by the storm, and the group had retreated indoors. The living room was dim, lit only by the occasional flare of lightning through the tall windows. The walls seemed to creak with every gust of wind, as if the old lodge itself was breathing along with the storm. Thomas sat in a chair near the hearth, though the fire inside had dwindled to coals. The heat barely reached him, and the damp chill of the forest seemed to seep through the very walls. His eyes felt heavy, but he couldn't relax. The events of the evening, the strange footprints, the flickering shadows, the whispers that didn't match the movement of lips, clung to him like the smell of wet earth. The group had grown quiet, too quiet. Sarah sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across from her, David kept staring into the darkness of the hallway, as though something were standing just out of sight. Emily scribbled in her notebook, though her hand trembled with each stroke of the pen. Even Mark, who had insisted earlier that all of this was nothing but their imaginations, had fallen silent, his jaw clenched tight. When the grandfather clock struck midnight, its deep chime seemed to ripple through the air like a warning. The sound lingered, blending strangely with the rain outside. That was when Thomas heard it. A voice. At first, it was faint, a whisper woven into the patter of water against glass. He frowned, leaning forward, straining to listen. The rain should have been random, chaotic, but now it carried rhythm, almost like speech. Come, outside. The words slipped into his ears like cold fingers. He jerked his head toward the window, his heart hammering. Did anyone else? He started, but stopped when he saw Sarah's face. She had gone pale, her eyes wide, fixed on the glass. You heard it too? She whispered. The room fell still. Only the rain moved, pouring down the panes in restless streaks. And then the voice came again, clearer this time, threading through the storm. You cannot stay here. A gust of wind rattled the windows and the lights flickered overhead. Emily dropped her pen. Mark muttered something under his breath and stood quickly, pacing the room as though movement alone could shake the unease. David finally spoke, his voice low. It's not the storm. That was someone speaking. Thomas rose from his chair and moved to the window. Beyond the glass, the forest loomed, black and dripping, every branch bending under the weight of rain. He pressed closer, his breath fogging the pain. For a moment, he thought he saw movement. A figure standing just beyond the treeline, barely more than a shadow. Lightning split the sky, flooding the clearing with white light. The figure vanished. But the echo of the voice remained, curling inside Thomas's head like smoke. Leave, before it comes. The words trailed off into the storm, leaving only the pounding of the rain and the silence of 6 people too frightened to breathe. The lodge felt suddenly smaller, its walls closing in. The forest outside pressed closer, as if it wanted to swallow the building whole. Thomas stepped back from the glass. His pulse thundered in his ears. Whatever that was, he said, his voice rough, it doesn't want us here. And for the first time since their arrival, no one argued with him. The lodge felt smaller than ever. The 6 of them huddled near the dim glow of the dying fire, the rain outside drumming relentlessly against the windows, a constant reminder that the forest waited just beyond the glass. The voice, low, urgent, commanding, had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the echo of its warning reverberating in their minds. Thomas could still feel it in his chest, cold and heavy. Leave, before it comes. It wasn't just words, it was a presence pressing against the inside of his skull. Each breath he drew seemed to carry it deeper into his lungs. Mark broke the silence first. We can't stay here. His voice was calm, but his eyes darted around the room. Whatever that was, it's not going to stop. Maybe we go upstairs. Away from it. Sarah shook her head, clutching her arms to herself. Upstairs isn't safe either. I've been up there before. There are rooms, empty, but I don't know. Something doesn't want to let you stay on that floor. Tyler's lips pressed into a thin line. Then what do? Sit here pretending we're safe. No one had an answer. The air inside the lodge had thickened, heavy with the smell of wet wood, smoke, and something fouler, iron, old blood, rot. Even Emily, usually quiet and composed, fidgeted with her notebook as if writing would anchor her to reality. A sudden scrape echoed from the hallway outside the living room. Every head snapped toward the sound. This time it was closer. Not a whisper. Not a suggestion. Something was moving along the walls, just beyond the firelight, dragging its weight across the floorboards. The sound paused, then continued, deliberate and slow, circling the room as though testing their patience, their fear. David's voice trembled. It's in the lodge. With us. Sarah's grip on the poker tightened. We should stick together. No one goes alone. Mark nodded reluctantly. Then we move. Upstairs. Just move slowly. Stay close to the wall. Don't let it see us. The group rose, forming a tight line. The storm outside was relentless, the windows rattling with each gust, but the sounds inside the lodge were worse. Soft footsteps, faint whispers, the occasional sharp creak of a floorboard somewhere ahead. Thomas led, lantern in hand, its weak light struggling to push back the darkness that pooled along the hall. The firelight behind them was gone, leaving only shadows that stretched impossibly long and twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist. They passed the first floor's empty rooms. Each door they passed seemed to breathe, the cracks in the wood widening and shrinking in the lantern glow, like it were alive, pulsing with some slow heartbeat. Halfway up the stairs, Thomas felt the air change. The warmth of the fire below was gone. The smell of the forest rain had seeped in through the walls, damp, earthy, and mixed with a metallic tang he could not name. His heart hammered. Above, the landing stretched long and narrow, lined with doors. Each one looked the same. Old, warped, numbered in peeling paint, some slightly ajar as if inviting them in. Shadows pooled at the edges, moving without reason. One door at the very end of the hall caught Thomas's eye. It was darker than the rest, almost black as if it were absorbing light. And from behind it came a whisper, soft but unmistakable. Thomas? He froze. The rest of the group halted as well. The name wasn't just called, it was drawn out, coaxing, patient, like someone trying to lure him closer. Don't, Tyler hissed. Don't go near it. Thomas felt his feet move before he could stop them. Compelled. Drawn. The air around the door was thick, pressing in, humming softly like the heartbeat of the lodge itself. Thomas? He reached for the knob. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, a blast of wind rattled the landing windows, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. A low, wet growl emanated from the door, vibrating through the floorboards and into their bones. Something pressed from the other side, heavy, deliberate, waiting. Sarah grabbed his arm. Thomas, step back. But it was too late. The door seemed to pulse under his hand, alive with intent. The whispers escalated, now a chorus of voices, faint and overlapping. Inside, inside, inside. The storm outside roared in answer, thunder cracking so loudly it seemed to shake the very foundations of the lodge. Thomas's breath came fast. His fingers tightened on the knob. He could feel the weight of something beyond the door, something ancient, patient, and hungry. And in that heartbeat, the group understood. The lodge had been waiting for them. And whatever was behind the door would not let them leave. The corridor held its breath. The storm outside hammered relentlessly, rain lashing the windows and wind rattling the shutters, but inside the lodge, an unnatural silence had fallen. Thomas's hand lingered on the cold, warped doorknob, the pulse of the lodge throbbing under his palm. Every nerve in his body screamed to pull away, to flee, but something invisible pressed him forward. The voices behind the door grew louder, overlapping now in a chaotic murmur. Come, inside. Sarah's grip on his arm was iron-strong. Thomas? Stop, she hissed. Her eyes darted toward the others, wide with fear. Mark's face was pale, lips parted, as though he'd lost the ability to speak. Tyler's fingers clenched into fists at his sides, and Emily's notebook had fallen forgotten to the floor. Thomas swallowed. His pulse hammered in his ears. He had to know, had to see. He twisted the knob. The door swung open with a groan, slow and deliberate, revealing a room shrouded in darkness. The lantern had been extinguished by the gust from the landing, and the weak firelight from downstairs barely reached inside. At first there was nothing, just shadows. Then the whispers coalesced, forming words that were not his own, not human. Finally, a cold wind erupted from the room, carrying the smell of damp soil and something fouler, iron, rot, decay. The temperature dropped instantly, frost forming on the edges of the doorframe as Thomas peered inside. The room itself was empty, or so it seemed. The floorboards were slick with moisture, and the air was thick, heavy with a presence that pressed against them from all sides. The shadows moved independently of the flickering light, stretching and curling like tendrils. A shape appeared in the corner, half seen, half imagined. A tall, thin figure, its face obscured, its movements jerky and unnatural. The whispers intensified, calling out their names one by one. Thomas, Sir, Mark, Emily. The group froze. The figure stepped forward, and the room seemed to expand impossibly, growing taller and darker with each movement. The floor groaned under its weight, though it was impossible to tell how heavy it truly was. Emily screamed, backing away. The notebook slipped from her hands, pages scattering like leaves across the floor. Mark lunged forward, trying to shield her, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. Tyler moved as well, but the figure reacted faster, turning toward him with unnatural speed. Its outline shimmered in the darkness, stretching, pulling at the edges of the room like black smoke made solid. The whispers became a chorus of hissing voices, rising in pitch until they felt like they were piercing the very walls. The temperature dropped further, and Thomas could see his breath forming in white clouds before him. Sarah grabbed his arm again, pulling him back. "We need to leave. Now." But the corridor outside the door had vanished. The walls stretched impossibly, the staircase below hidden in a shadow that pulsed like living ink. The lodge itself had changed. It was no longer the familiar building they had entered. It was something older, something alive, shaped by whatever haunted it. The figure moved closer, the whispers swelling into a deafening roar. Inside, inside, inside. And then the lantern flickered back to life, held in Sarah's trembling hands. The light illuminated the figure fully, impossibly thin, impossibly tall, its face a featureless void, blacker than the shadows around it. Its long fingers reached toward them, stretching beyond natural limits, curling toward Thomas as if to pull him into the darkness. Thomas stumbled backward, tripping over Emily's scattered papers. The figure advanced, gliding without sound, the whispers chasing them, pressing in, suffocating. Mark shouted, "Run!" They bolted back into the corridor, or at least what they thought was the corridor. The walls twisted around them, doors appearing and disappearing at impossible angles. The lodge had become a labyrinth of shadow, rain, and whispers, and the storm outside seemed to roar through every inch of it. Behind them, the figure followed, silent except for the rising chorus of voices, calling, beckoning, demanding entry into their minds. Thomas could hear his own name over and over, interlaced with commands he couldn't understand fully, yet felt compelled to obey. He looked at the others, fear mirrored in every face, eyes wide, hearts hammering, and knew they were all trapped in this living nightmare together. The lodge had awakened, and whatever had been waiting in the dark room was hungry. The corridor twisted beneath their feet. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he stumbled over the warped floorboards. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the building itself were resisting their escape. The air had grown cold and thick, pressing against their lungs with every breath, making it hard to think, let alone run. Behind them, the whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices speaking in tongues just beyond comprehension. They slithered through the walls, into their ears, curling around their thoughts, trying to unravel them from the inside. Mark's voice rang out, panicked. "This isn't real. It can't be." Thomas didn't respond. His eyes scanned the hallway. Doors lined the walls like teeth, some slightly ajar, others completely sealed, as if the lodge were swallowing its own corridors. The staircase they had come up on was gone, replaced by a wall of dark, polished wood that seemed to pulse with shadow. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched the lantern, its weak glow fighting the darkness. "We need to stick together. Don't let it separate us." Emily whimpered, glancing over her shoulder, and Thomas understood why. The figure from the room had appeared again, emerging from the shadows ahead, moving impossibly fast despite its enormous height. Its featureless face tilted toward them, the whispers now forming the faintest, incomprehensible laughter. Tyler grabbed Thomas's arm. "We can't fight it. Just move." They ran down a corridor that seemed to stretch forever, the floorboards creaking and groaning under their weight. Every corner they turned led them deeper into the lodge, not out of it. The walls narrowed and widened without logic, doors appearing where none had been, hallways twisting at impossible angles. Outside, the storm had intensified. The wind howled, and rain slashed against the windows with a force that made the lodge shudder. Lightning flashed, illuminating the endless corridor in stark white, and for a brief second, Thomas could see the figure directly behind them, gliding over the warped floor as if it were floating. Its shadow stretched across the walls, larger than life, engulfing everything in darkness. Sarah cried out, "This isn't real. It can't be." But Thomas felt the building itself pulse with intent. Each step they took, the lodge seemed to respond, shifting around them, guiding them into traps of shadow and fear. The whispers followed, pressing into their minds, speaking in a language that was old, angry, and aware. Emily stumbled, falling to her knees. Thomas reached down, grabbing her arm. "Come on. We have to keep moving." The corridor opened into a massive hall that hadn't existed before. The ceiling arched impossibly high, its beams twisting and sagging, dripping with condensation from the storm outside. Windows lined the walls, each one fogged over, the forest beyond distorted and unrecognizable. Rain streaked across them in furious sheets, and every time lightning struck, the trees outside seemed closer, as if leaning toward the lodge, watching. The figure appeared at the far end of the hall, just beyond the reach of their lantern. It didn't move as they expected, it merely waited, a void of shadow that pulsed and stretched. And the whispers intensified. "Inside, inside, inside." Thomas swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the lodge pressing down on him, the storm pressing through him, and the thing behind them pressing on their sanity. Mark shook his head violently. "We can't stay here. We have to find another way out." Tyler pointed toward a staircase leading down at the far end of the hall. "Down. There has to be an exit down there." The group sprinted toward it, the floorboards groaning ominously with each step. The shadows clung to their heels, the whispers like icy fingers sliding across their skin. As they reached the stairs, the hall seemed to stretch further, longer, turning into a labyrinth of endless darkness. The figure followed, slower now, but patient, its presence stretching into every corner, filling every shadow, pressing into their minds like a living nightmare. Thomas glanced at the others. They were all pale, exhausted, terrified beyond words. The lodge had changed. It wasn't just a building. It was alive. And it wanted them trapped inside, alone with whatever had been waiting in the darkness. The storm roared outside, thunder shaking the walls. Rain battered the windows like fists, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling every corner of the hall, wrapping around them. Inside, forever, inside. Thomas took a deep breath, gripping the railing as they began their descent. Every step felt like wading through water, heavy and resistant. And as the last flash of lightning illuminated the hall, he saw it again. The figure, closer now, its long limbs stretching impossibly toward them, darkness consuming everything it touched. And Thomas knew, no matter how far they ran, the lodge would not let them leave. The staircase ended in a hallway that Thomas could barely comprehend. The lodge had shifted again, twisting the layout into something unfamiliar, impossible. Walls leaned at odd angles, doors that had been solid moments ago now hung ajar, swaying slightly as if breathing. The air was colder here, damp and sharp, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth through cracks in the windows. The storm outside had not eased. Rain struck the roof and walls in relentless torrents, thunder rolling low and deep, shaking the lodge's very bones. Every lightning flash illuminated the warped corridors, showing glimpses of shadows that didn't belong to any of them. "Keep moving," Mark hissed, voice tight with fear. "There has to be an exit." Sarah shook her head, her hair plastered to her forehead. "Down here, or anywhere, nothing feels real anymore. The lodge, it's changing." Thomas's fingers gripped the railing tightly. The shadows clung to the edges of the hallway like smoke, writhing and pulsing as they ran. Behind them, the figure had disappeared, for now, but its presence lingered, a suffocating weight pressing on the back of their necks. Emily stopped abruptly. "Wait." She pointed toward a cracked window. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly, rain blurring the trees into a wall of black and gray. And in that moment, Thomas felt it, a pull, subtle but undeniable, drawing them toward the forest. Why the woods?" Thomas muttered. "Maybe there's a way out there. If the lodge is alive, maybe it wants us gone?" Tyler frowned, shaking his head. "Or maybe it wants to drive us into something else. Look at it, the forest looks wrong. Alive." Mark stepped closer to the window, squinting through the curtain of rain. The trees seemed to sway unnaturally, their shapes bending toward the lodge as if the storm itself was guiding them. Shadows stretched long across the ground outside, some darker than they should be, moving against the wind. Sarah's voice was barely audible. "It's calling us." Thomas swallowed hard. He felt the same pull Emily had, a strange compulsion like the forest was breathing, waiting, beckoning them into the darkness beyond the lodge. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than it had before. Every step toward the window brought a new sound, a whisper, a scrape, a distant thump. The lodge groaned with shifting timbers, the walls bending inward, closing in. Mark turned sharply. "We either go into the forest or we stay trapped here. Staying, that's not an option anymore." Tyler grabbed a lantern from the wall sconce, lighting it with shaking hands. The weak glow flickered across the warped corridor. We moved together. One path, one direction. No splitting up. Thomas nodded, swallowing the tight lump in his throat. The forest loomed beyond the window, endless and dark, rain streaking the trunks and leaves into ghostly shapes. There was a trail barely visible that led from the lodge's porch into the woods. It seemed to shimmer faintly in the rain as if inviting them. The group moved cautiously, stepping toward the door that led outside. The lodge groaned with each motion, and Thomas could have sworn he felt eyes on their backs. The lingering awareness of the figure from the dark room still there, watching, waiting. The door creaked open, revealing the pouring rain. The wind struck them immediately, lashing wet against their faces, soaking clothes and hair. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest. The trees bent toward them like dark sentinels, the trail twisting into the black beyond. "Stay close," Tyler warned, lifting the lantern. Its flickering light cut small circles into the darkness. "And don't look back." They stepped out together. Each footfall on the soaked ground sent mud splashing against boots. The forest seemed alive, the sound of the storm mingling with whispers of movement in the trees. Something shifted, something watched them. Thomas felt the lodge behind him, solid yet impossibly far away. The building seemed to stretch endlessly upward and downward in his mind's eye, impossibly large, alive, still shifting. And yet, the pull of the forest, strange, sinister, compelling, drew them forward. Every step down the narrow trail seemed to pull them deeper into a world that was no longer entirely human. The rain masked footsteps, yet Thomas felt the presence of something moving in tandem with them, just beyond the lantern's glow. The shadows stretched unnaturally across the path, bending toward their legs, teasing them, pressing closer. A low growl rose from the darkness somewhere ahead. Not animal, Thomas realized immediately. It was deliberate, patient, intelligent, and it was waiting for them. "Keep moving," Mark urged, his voice sharp, desperate. "Whatever's out there, it's patient, but we can't stop." Lightning struck again, illuminating the forest for a heartbeat. Thomas caught a glimpse of shapes between the trees, tall, dark, and humanoid, yet wrong, limbs too long, moving with impossible grace. They didn't run, they watched. They waited. And then the rain seemed to whisper, carrying voices that threaded into their minds, indistinguishable from the storm. "Inside, forever, inside." Thomas shivered, gripping the lantern tightly. The forest was alive. The lodge was alive. And he knew, without speaking, that the thing from the door, whatever it had been, had followed them, waiting to claim them when the trees finally swallowed them whole. The group pressed onward, down the muddy, twisting path into the storm-soaked forest, shadows reaching and twisting in the rain. Every step was heavy, every breath a battle against the cold and fear. And behind them, Thomas swore he could hear the faintest echo of that featureless voice calling, patient and eternal. "Inside, inside, inside." The forest swallowed them. Each step into the rain-soaked wilderness pressed a weight against their chests, as if the storm itself was trying to trap them between wet branches and dark shadows. The trees loomed taller than they should have, their trunks blackened by the storm and bent into shapes that defied logic. Every gust of wind carried whispers that tangled with the rustle of leaves, murmurs that seemed to speak directly into their minds. Thomas clutched the lantern tighter, its flickering light barely piercing the darkness beyond the muddy trail. Every few steps, lightning illuminated the forest in brief, violent flashes. For a heartbeat, he could see movement, figures among the trees, tall and impossibly thin, limbs twisting like smoke. They didn't run. They didn't chase. They just watched, patient and deliberate. Emily stumbled, her foot caught in a root slick with rain. She fell forward and Thomas grabbed her arm. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something in the shadows beyond the trail. "It's there," she whispered. "It's watching us." Sarah swallowed hard, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "We need to keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look away from the trail." Mark muttered, "It's like the forest itself is alive. It's waiting for us to make a mistake." Tyler led, holding the lantern aloft. Its glow illuminated the narrow path just ahead, but beyond the light, the darkness seemed to pulse, moving with a life of its own. Rain dripped from the leaves above, splattering on their shoulders and soaking their hair, but even the storm couldn't mask the sensation that something, or things, were following them. A branch cracked sharply behind them. All six froze. The sound wasn't random, it was deliberate, a step echoing in rhythm with their own. Thomas dared not turn, though his mind screamed to see what was there. The whispers rose again, riding the wind between the trees. "Inside, inside, forever." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the forest in white brilliance. In that instant, Thomas saw it clearly, a figure emerging from the trees, taller than any man, faceless, limbs stretching and bending unnaturally, moving with a grace that was impossible. Its presence carried a cold that cut through their rain-soaked clothing, straight into their bones. "Run!" Mark shouted, and the group bolted. Mud and water splashed beneath their feet as the trail twisted and narrowed. The lantern light flickered violently, casting long, writhing shadows across the trunks. The whispers followed, threading through the trees, wrapping around their minds like black smoke. Thomas stumbled again, nearly falling into a shallow ditch. He heard a low, wet growl somewhere to the left, close and deliberate. Whatever it was didn't chase them immediately. It moved alongside, patient and calculating, keeping pace without effort. Sarah screamed as a branch whipped across her face, tearing a shallow cut across her cheek. "It's everywhere," she shouted. "It doesn't need to chase us." The path twisted into a clearing, though the storm made it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. In the center, a massive, twisted tree rose higher than the rest, its roots curling like serpents over the wet ground. The forest seemed to lean toward it, and Thomas felt the pull again, the same compulsion that had drawn them from the lodge. "Do we go there?" Emily whispered, terrified. "It's calling us." Mark shook his head. "No, that's exactly what it wants. Whatever's behind this, it's setting a trap." Thomas hesitated. The forest, the lodge, the storm, they all seemed connected, alive, shaping reality around them. And the thing from the lodge, the faceless figure, had followed them. He could feel it in the air, in the pressure against his chest, in the way the shadows stretched just beyond the lantern's glow. A low, rumbling growl rose from the base of the twisted tree, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The branches above seemed to reach downward, and the whispers coalesced into one unified voice, deep and patient. "Inside, forever, with us." The group backed away instinctively, forming a tight circle. The rain soaked them, the mud sucked at their boots, and yet they could feel the forest tightening around them, herding them toward the tree. Thomas swallowed hard. "We have to move. Now, together." They turned back toward the trail, only to find it gone. The path had vanished, swallowed by the storm and darkness. Every direction was black, the trees bending unnaturally, the shadows shifting in impossible angles. And then, from the mist between the trunks, more shapes emerged. Tall, thin, faceless figures, moving with silent precision. The whispers intensified, a chorus of voices echoing in the rain. "Inside, inside, forever." Thomas realized, with a cold certainty, that escape was no longer just about leaving the lodge. The forest itself was alive, a predator shaped by the storm, the lodge, and the faceless things that hunted them. And it wanted them, all of them, inside. The group huddled together, drenched and trembling. Every instinct screamed to run, but the path forward was obscured by the storm, by shadow, and by the relentless, patient will of the forest that had claimed the lodge. And then a shape stepped into the clearing, closer than any of them had expected. Its face was void, its limbs impossibly long. It tilted its head, and Thomas understood fully. It had been waiting for them to arrive, patient, eternal, and hungry. "Inside," it whispered. The rain fell harder. The forest pulsed, and the hunt began. The rain hammered down, drenching them to the bone. Each step through the mud-soaked forest felt like wading through quicksand. The trees loomed around them like blackened sentinels, their twisted limbs clawing at the storm-lashed sky. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving in ways the mind refused to accept. And the whispering followed, threading through the wind, through the pounding rain, into their very thoughts. "Inside, inside, forever." Thomas led, lantern trembling in his hands. His teeth were chattering from cold and fear, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let himself look back. He knew the faceless figure that had followed them from the lodge, was there, waiting, watching. A sudden crack behind them made everyone freeze. Tyler spun, lantern casting wild circles of light through the twisted trees. There, just beyond the glow, a faceless figure stepped forward. Its limbs bent impossibly, almost serpentine, moving with fluid grace. Its presence carried a cold so deep it clawed into their bones. Sarah screamed, grabbing Thomas's arm. "Run!" They bolted, mud flying under their feet. The figure glided silently behind them, closing distance effortlessly. Every lightning flash revealed more shapes among the trees, tall, thin, faceless, each one moving with eerie precision. Their bodies didn't bend naturally, they twisted like smoke caught in wind. Emily tripped over a root and Thomas grabbed her just in time. She gasped, eyes wide. It's too many." Mark shouted, panic rising in his chest. "Don't stop. Don't even think about stopping." The forest seemed alive. The trail they had been following moments ago had vanished. Trees leaned inward, bending toward them, roots twisting like serpents to block their path. The rain blurred everything, washing the world into black and gray, and yet the whispers remained, louder now, more insistent. "Inside, inside, inside." Thomas stumbled over another root, nearly losing the lantern. Its light flickered, revealing the nearest figure. Its faceless head tilted, black void gleaming wet in the rain, limbs stretching impossibly long, fingers curling like claws. Thomas felt a tug in his chest, a pull toward the figure as if it were drawing him in with invisible chains. "Don't let it take you," Sarah screamed, yanking him back. The group pressed onward, mud sucking at their boots. Another figure appeared directly in front of them, blocking the path. The whispering crescendoed, threading through their minds with terrifying clarity. "Inside, inside, forever." Mark swung a fallen branch at the figure, striking it. The air shivered with the blow. The shadow recoiled, not as a physical being but as if the impact hurt some part of the forest itself. It emitted a wet, hollow hiss, a sound that was neither human nor animal. Tyler grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her past the figure. "We can't fight them all. Just keep moving." The group ran into a small clearing, the rain pelting them, the lightning revealing glimpses of the lodge behind them, impossibly distant yet looming like a predator. The faceless figures surrounded them, emerging from every shadow between the trees. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. Their presence alone pressed the fear deeper into their hearts. Thomas could feel it, a hunger patient and eternal. The forest, the lodge, and these things were all connected, a single entity bent on claiming them. The whispers became a chorus, a wet, sibilant song of inevitability. "Inside, forever, inside." Emily's voice trembled. We have to find shelter. The lodge, maybe it's the only place safe." Sarah shook her head, drenched and shaking. "Safe? Nothing's safe anymore. It followed us here. The lodge isn't our refuge, it's part of it." Lightning illuminated the clearing again. In that brief flash, Thomas saw dozens of faceless figures emerging from the shadows, stretching out of the darkness like living smoke. The forest itself seemed to pulse, bending toward them, pressing them into the clearing. Mark's voice was urgent. "We have to run, through the forest, not around it." Thomas nodded. There was no other choice. Their survival depended on moving forward, deeper into unknown, storm-soaked darkness, towards something that might be worse than the lodge itself. The first figure stepped forward. Its elongated limbs reached toward Thomas, blackness curling like wet ink. The whispers now weren't just words. They were commands, pressing into their very minds, testing their sanity. "Inside, inside, inside, join, forever." Thomas felt a cold grip around his chest, a sensation that was not physical, but real nonetheless. His heart hammered as the figure glided closer. "Run!" he shouted, and together, drenched, mud-soaked, hearts racing, they plunged deeper into the forest, the faceless figures gliding silently after them, relentless and patient, the storm their accomplice, the forest alive with hunger. And behind them, the lodge waited. The forest pressed in closer with every step. Rain slashed at their faces, blinding in sheets, and the mud clung to their boots like glue, slowing them down. The faceless figures followed silently, their elongated limbs gliding across the terrain without sound. The whispers had become a constant roar inside their heads, threading through their thoughts, testing their sanity. "Inside, inside, forever." Thomas led, lantern swaying wildly, its light illuminating twisted trunks and roots that seemed to shift with every flash of lightning. The forest was alive. He could feel it in the way the trees leaned toward them, in the subtle vibration beneath his feet, in the oppressive weight of the air itself. Every instinct screamed to run, but the path forward was obscured, distorted by the storm and the unnatural growth of the woods. Emily stumbled again, tripping over a root that seemed to coil like a snake. It's trapping us," she gasped. Mark's eyes widened in horror as he looked around. The forest wasn't just alive, it was changing. The path they had been following moments ago had disappeared entirely. Trees bent inward, forming walls of shadow that pressed against their shoulders. The branches reached down like claws, snatching at their clothing, tugging at their arms. Sarah screamed as a branch lashed across her face, drawing blood. It's hunting us." Tyler's lantern flickered, throwing long, writhing shadows across the trees. And then the ground beneath them shifted. Mud churned as if something massive moved below, unseen. Roots twisted, rising to block their escape, wrapping around their ankles, tripping them. The forest had become a snare, alive and intelligent, bending reality to trap them. Thomas shouted, struggling to free his boot from a thick root. "Keep moving. Don't stop. It wants us to freeze." The faceless figures glided closer, patient and deliberate. They didn't run. They didn't need to. The forest itself did the work, corralling the group, funneling them deeper into the trap. The whispers had risen to a deafening crescendo, echoing through the storm. Inside, join us, forever." Mark swung at the nearest root with a branch, trying to hack it away, but it twisted violently, wrapping around his arm instead. He screamed, jerking free with effort, his heart hammering in terror. "Don't look back," Sarah's voice trembled, but it was impossible. Every glance over the shoulder revealed more figures emerging from the shadows, faceless and immense, moving with unnatural grace, patient and relentless. The group finally reached a small clearing, but it offered no relief. The trees formed a natural amphitheater, their trunks bent inward, roots weaving a lattice of impossible complexity. The storm intensified, wind howling and lightning cracking across the sky, illuminating the faceless figures in sudden, stark flashes. One figure stepped forward, closer than the others, and Thomas felt the same pull he had felt at the lodge, an invisible chain tethering him to the thing. Emily shrieked as the figure extended a hand. Its fingers, impossibly long and black as ink, reached toward her, and the ground beneath her legs seemed to rise, a root lifting her slightly before she collapsed forward into the mud. Thomas grabbed her, dragging her toward the only apparent exit, a narrow path barely visible through the twisted trees. But the forest resisted. Roots snaked up from the earth, twisting together to block the way, bending reality in subtle but terrifying ways. What had been straight moments ago now curved impossibly, forming dead ends and loops. Tyler turned back to see the faceless figure following, gliding silently. He swung the lantern toward it, the light revealing an absence of any features, a void that seemed to pull at his soul. The whispers coalesced into one coherent thought. "Inside, forever, with us." The group ran blindly, slipping in the mud, branches tearing at their clothes and skin. Every step was met with resistance, the forest itself conspiring to stop them. Thomas realized with bone-deep certainty that this was not just a pursuit. The lodge, the figures, the storm, and now the forest were all connected. This was a hunting ground, and they were the prey. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the narrow path ahead for a heartbeat. Beyond it, the forest seemed denser, darker, more threatening, yet impossibly it was the only way forward. Thomas looked at the others. Eyes wide, hearts racing, bloodied and soaked, they nodded in silent agreement. Forward was the only choice. And as they plunged deeper into the forest, Thomas could feel the weight of countless unseen eyes, the whispers threading into their minds, the storm pressing down like a living thing. The trap was closing, and the hunt had only just begun. The rain hammered down like a relentless drum, each drop striking their shoulders and faces with icy precision. Mud sucked at their boots, slowing their progress, but the forest pressed them forward with invisible hands. The whispers had grown deafening, no longer just voices in the wind. Now they seemed to seep into their bones, echoing inside their skulls, demanding obedience. "Inside, forever, inside, join." Thomas led, lantern trembling violently, casting frantic, flickering light across the twisted trunks and writhing shadows. Every time lightning split the sky, he glimpsed movement between the trees, figures emerging, bending unnaturally, limbs elongated beyond human limits. Their faceless voids glimmered wetly in the rain. Suddenly the group froze. Emily screamed as one of the figures lunged out of the shadows with impossible speed. Its long, ink-black fingers shot toward her, coldness radiating from them like frost. She stumbled backward, dragging Thomas with her as the figure struck the mud where she had stood moments before. The earth splashed, wet and red with displaced soil, but she had narrowly escaped its grasp. Mark shouted, panic cracking his voice. "It's too fast. It's unreal." Sarah grabbed Tyler's arm. "Move. Don't stop." The figure moved with a fluid grace that made the trees themselves seem still in comparison. Lightning illuminated its form, impossibly thin, impossibly tall, limbs bending at angles that should have been impossible. Its faceless head tilted toward them, a void that pressed against their minds, tugging at their sanity. The whispers intensified. "Inside, forever, inside." Thomas swung the lantern, light cutting through the darkness in a frantic arc. The figure recoiled, but not in pain. It was almost deliberate, a predator teasing prey. The air around it pulsed with intent, cold and heavy. Emily tripped again, mud pulling at her legs. Thomas yanked her up, but the figure advanced, gliding silently, its presence suffocating. The trees seemed to bend inward, roots twisting upward to block any retreat. The storm roared overhead, but the forest itself hummed with life, dark, patient, and aware. Mark swung a fallen branch at the figure as it lunged again. This time, the contact was more than visual. The air itself seemed to shudder under the strike, a wet, hollow sound emanating from the void where the figure's face should be. It recoiled slightly, limbs writhing, then struck again, faster this time, forcing the group backward. Sarah's voice cut through the rain. "We can't fight it all. We have to run." They bolted down a narrow path that appeared suddenly between two trees, but the forest warped around them. Roots rose like snakes, branches twisted to block the way, the trail bending impossibly to trap them. Every step was met with resistance, the earth itself pressing against their feet. Thomas could hear the whispers threading through the storm, sharper now, directed. "Inside, inside, join, forever." Lightning flashed, illuminating another figure stepping out of the shadows ahead. Taller than the first, its limbs bending backward unnaturally, faceless, patient. The forest seemed to pulse with anticipation, bending to force them toward it. Emily screamed as a branch, moving as if alive, lashed toward her, tearing her sleeve. Tyler yanked her away, but the momentum sent them both sliding into mud. Thomas and Sarah scrambled to pull them back, but the forest was relentless. Roots twisted, branches whipped, and the rain turned the ground to treacherous sludge. The first figure struck again, closer this time, fingers brushing Thomas's shoulder. The cold was immediate, bone-deep, searing through him. The lantern wavered in his grip, casting long, flickering shadows. The whispers turned into a chorus. "Inside, inside, forever, join us." Mark grabbed the nearest branch, raising it like a weapon, but the figure didn't hesitate. It moved faster than thought, gliding over the mud, reaching for him. Mark swung desperately, striking it, and the figure recoiled, vanishing into the shadows, not gone but momentarily displaced, waiting. Thomas realized with a sick certainty that the forest, the lodge, and the figures were all one entity working together. The storm, the rain, the wind, everything pressed on them, shaping the hunt, testing their fear, eroding their minds. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, trembling but firm. "We have to move. Now. Don't stop, no matter what." With no time to think, they plunged deeper into the storm-drenched forest, mud sucking at their feet, roots clawing at their legs. The faceless figures glided silently behind them, patient, relentless, and the whispers followed, threading into their minds with terrifying clarity. "Inside, inside, forever, you cannot escape." The forest closed in around them. The rain turned the ground to a slippery quagmire, lightning revealed glimpses of countless shapes moving among the twisted trees, and the figures pressed ever closer, not attacking directly but herding, corralling, shaping their path. Thomas realized the terrifying truth. The forest itself had become a hunting ground, and they were being driven toward a destination they could not see, a trap deeper and darker than anything they had yet encountered. And in the distance, through the sheets of rain and the shadows of impossible trees, a faint glimmer, like firelight, hinted at a place ahead. But whether it was salvation or another nightmare, Thomas didn't know. All he knew was they had to reach it, before the forest claimed them completely. Through the relentless rain and mud, the faint glow ahead beckoned like a promise. Every step toward it felt like wading through a nightmare, the forest pulling them back with twisting roots, branches clawing at their clothing, the faceless figures gliding silently behind, patient, watching, never rushing but never letting them go. Thomas led, lantern flickering, casting brief, erratic light on twisted tree trunks and warped roots. Each flash of lightning revealed shadows between the trees that shouldn't have been there, shapes bending unnaturally, impossibly thin, faceless, and patient. The whispers had intensified, threading into their minds with a relentless, insidious insistence. Inside, forever, join us, inside. Emily stumbled in the mud. Thomas yanked her upright, and her wide eyes locked on the glow ahead. Is it a cabin? She whispered. Her voice trembled with exhaustion and fear. Mark squinted through the rain. I don't know. Maybe shelter. But it could be another trap. Sarah shook her head, trembling. We don't have a choice. We can't stay here. The forest won't let us. We have to try. The group pushed forward, wading through the quagmire of mud and roots. Every step made the whispers louder, sharper, more personal, as if the forest knew their names, their fears, their deepest thoughts. The glow ahead pulsed faintly, steady, almost hypnotic. As they drew closer, the glow took shape. A small clearing illuminated by a fire that burned unnaturally bright, orange and blue flames twisting like living serpents. The firelight cast grotesque shadows across the ground, making the trees themselves seem to bend and reach toward it. Thomas hesitated at the edge of the clearing. The air smelled of wet earth and something metallic, coppery, sharp. And then he noticed the ground. Mud churned and soaked, but in the center of the clearing, roots formed an intricate pattern, like a web or a sigil, glowing faintly in the firelight. Mark's voice was a whisper. It's ritualistic. Something alive. Emily shivered. It's calling us. Sarah grabbed Thomas's arm. Don't step forward. It's a trap. But the pull was undeniable. The forest itself seemed to bend toward the fire, shaping the trees, twisting the shadows, pulling them deeper into the clearing. And then, from the darkness at the edges, a faceless figure emerged. Tall, impossibly thin, limbs bending at unnatural angles, its void-like face focused entirely on them. Its presence pressed against their minds, cold and heavy, whispering directly into their thoughts. Inside, forever, join us. The group froze. Even in the storm, even with the mud under their feet and the rain soaking them, the clearing felt like another world. Time slowed. The firelight cast impossible shadows, shapes that didn't belong to any of them. Roots twisted subtly as if alive, and Thomas realized with sickening clarity, this wasn't just a trap. It was a snare designed to break them, mind, body, and soul. Emily's voice trembled. We have to pass it, somehow. If we don't... The figure advanced. The firelight reflected off its elongated limbs, black void stretching unnaturally. Thomas felt the invisible pull again, stronger than ever, as if the forest itself had wrapped chains around him. His legs ached, his lungs burned, but he stepped forward, pulling Emily and the others with him. Mark swung a branch at the nearest root that curled into the clearing. The root writhed like a serpent, resisting, and when the branch struck, the root recoiled sharply, almost as if in pain. The figure behind them didn't flinch. It simply glided forward, patient, unstoppable, its presence a void of cold intent. Sarah whispered sharply, "Don't stop moving. Whatever happens, don't stop." The group pressed into the center of the clearing, every step measured against the sinking mud, the twisting roots, the unseen pull of the forest, and the figure advancing steadily toward them. The firelight seemed to react to their movement, shadows stretching and twisting with every step, forming shapes that moved independently of the trees or their own bodies. Lightning flashed, and Thomas saw dozens of shapes among the trees at the clearing's edge, more faceless figures, patient, watching, waiting. And the whispers, now almost deafening, threaded into their minds with terrifying clarity. Inside, forever, join us. Thomas realized with a chill that the clearing wasn't salvation. It wasn't a refuge. It was another hunting ground. The forest, the lodge, the figures, the storm, they were all one, working in unison to drive the group towards something beyond their comprehension, testing their fear, their will, their very minds. And as they stood there, mud-soaked and terrified, the figure in the center of the clearing tilted its head, void face fixed on them, its limbs curling and twisting like smoke. The firelight danced across its form, revealing movement in the shadows, suggesting more shapes emerging from the darkness. The pull toward the center was irresistible. Thomas felt it tug at his chest, his thoughts, his sanity. The forest, the lodge, the storm, they all demanded submission. And the whispers promised only one thing: inside, forever. The group braced themselves, knowing instinctively that crossing this clearing would change everything, that the next step could be their last free one. Thomas swallowed hard as he stepped forward, the mud sucking at his boots, roots twisting beneath him like grasping fingers. The others followed, huddled close, drenched and shivering, lantern flickering violently. The fire in the center of the clearing burned unnaturally bright, orange and blue flames curling like living serpents. Shadows danced across the trees, writhing, bending unnaturally, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for them. The faceless figure in the center of the clearing advanced slowly, its elongated limbs bending in impossible angles. It didn't move like a creature, it moved like a force of nature, deliberate, inevitable, patient. The whispers threaded through their minds, sharp and insistent. Inside, forever, join us, inside. Emily stumbled, mud pulling at her legs. Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her upright. Keep moving, he whispered, voice shaking. We have to cross it. Don't stop. Mark swung a branch at a root that lashed out toward him. The root recoiled, writhing violently as if alive. It's trying to trap us, he shouted. Every step, it's alive. Sarah's eyes were wide, scanning the shadows. Don't look at it. Just move. Don't even think about stopping. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with each step. The closer they moved to the center, the stronger the pull became, tugging at their chests, threading into their thoughts, pressing on their minds like a physical weight. Thomas felt his heart hammering in his chest, lungs burning from the effort, but he forced himself onward. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the clearing in a violent flash. Dozens of shapes emerged at the edge of the trees, more faceless figures gliding silently, their void faces fixed on the group. The firelight cast grotesque shadows across the mud and roots, and Thomas realized with a cold certainty, they were walking into a snare, a hunting ground designed to strip them of everything. Their sanity, their freedom, even their very bodies. The faceless figure in the center extended one impossibly long arm. The tip hovered just above the mud, bending reality around it. Thomas felt a tug like an invisible cord pulling at his chest. He stumbled, almost falling into the fire itself, but Sarah yanked him back. Careful, she shouted. It wants to claim you. Emily screamed as a root shot up from the mud, curling around her ankle. Thomas yanked at it, and it resisted, tightening like a vice. He felt the forest pressing in from all sides, branches twisting toward them, rain lashing against their faces, wind howling through the trees like a living beast. The whispers intensified, threading directly into their thoughts. Inside, forever, join us, inside. Mark swung the branch again, striking one of the roots. The impact sent a shiver through the clearing, the fire flickering violently, casting long, writhing shadows. The faceless figure didn't flinch. It glided forward, slow and deliberate, its presence a void pressing against their minds. Thomas realized the horrifying truth. The clearing itself was a living trap, a nexus where the forest, the lodge, and the faceless figures converged. The fire was not just fire, it was part of the entity, a beacon designed to draw them in, to test their will, to weaken their minds. Almost there, Thomas muttered, forcing his legs forward. Just a few more steps. Emily's eyes were wide with terror. It's following our thoughts. It knows what we're afraid of. The figure reached toward them, limbs bending in impossible angles, black void face fixed on Thomas. The pull was stronger than ever, tugging at his chest, threading into his very mind. He could feel himself slipping, the whispers forming words in his own voice. Inside, forever, you will join us. Sarah grabbed his arm, dragging him forward. Fight it. Don't let it take you. Lightning flashed, illuminating the entire clearing. Thomas saw dozens of faceless figures in the trees and shadows, patient, waiting, their presence pressing like a tide. The roots underfoot writhed, lifting slightly to trip them, to slow them, to trap them. The fire danced higher, blue flames curling like tongues, casting shapes that moved independently of the trees. They reached the center of the clearing. The fire roared, its unnatural heat striking their soaked bodies, but it wasn't physical fire alone. It pressed against their minds, tugging at their thoughts, demanding submission. The faceless figure hovered just inches away, black void face radiating cold intent, limbs twisting around them. Thomas forced himself to take another step, and then another. Every inch forward was a battle against the forest, the storm, the fire, and the figure itself. The whispers became a cacophony, threading into their minds with relentless insistence. Inside, forever, join, inside. The group huddled together, hearts pounding, muscles trembling, mud and rain soaking them, the faceless figure looming, the fire roiling with unnatural energy. Thomas knew with chilling certainty, crossing this clearing was only the beginning. Whatever lay beyond, whatever the forest and lodge had planned, would be far worse than anything they had encountered so far. And yet, moving backward was impossible. The forest had shifted, roots and branches blocking retreat. The storm pressed down like a living weight, and the faceless figure advanced with patient inevitability. The only choice was forward, into the fire, into the unknown, into whatever nightmare waited beyond the clearing. The fire roared before them, unnatural in its blue and orange dance, casting grotesque, twisting shadows across the clearing. The ground pulsed beneath their feet, the mud and roots alive, writhing to block escape. The faceless figure hovered, elongated limbs bending like smoke, void face fixed on Thomas as if probing for weakness. The whispers, once subtle, now screamed in their minds. Inside, forever, join. Inside, there is no escape. Emily stumbled, mud sucking at her boots, and Thomas grabbed her arm. Keep moving, he shouted, voice shaking. Don't stop no matter what. Mark swung a branch desperately at a root that shot up from the mud, twisting toward him. The branch struck, but the root reacted violently, lashing like a whip, catching him on the shoulder and sending him sprawling. Blood mixed with rain and mud, and he scrambled upright, heart pounding. Suddenly, the faceless figure lunged. Not in the way a human might, but in a fluid, unnatural motion, gliding over the ground like liquid shadow. Its elongated fingers brushed Emily's shoulder as she screamed, and Thomas felt the same invisible pull at his chest, a tug at his very soul, threading into his mind with icy intent. Sarah yanked Emily backward, and the group bolted toward the edge of the clearing. But the forest fought them. Roots rose like serpents from the mud, wrapping around their ankles, tripping them. Branches whipped violently, tearing at their clothes and skin. The firelight flickered with every movement, casting shadows that twisted independently, forming shapes that lunged at them with terrifying clarity. The faceless figure advanced steadily, patient, relentless, its presence pressing like a physical weight. Thomas could feel it probing their minds, sensing fear, targeting weakness. The whispers had become a chorus, a cacophony of voices threading into every thought, every heartbeat. Inside, inside, forever, join us, give in. Emily screamed as a root coiled around her leg. Thomas yanked her free, but another root lashed toward Mark, striking his arm. Pain seared through him, but he kept running, limbs slipping in mud, boots sucking at the wet earth. Tyler swung the lantern violently, light flashing across the figure. It recoiled slightly, not in pain, but almost as if acknowledging the attack. Then it struck again, gliding silently, limbs bending impossibly, fingertips grazing Sarah's shoulder. The cold radiating from it froze her blood, and for a moment she froze in terror. No! Thomas shouted, grabbing her arm and yanking her forward. Keep moving. Don't look back. The clearing became a whirlwind of chaos. Roots writhing, branches lashing, fire twisting unnaturally, shadows moving independently of the trees. The faceless figure didn't chase in the conventional sense. It manipulated the environment, bending the forest itself into a weapon. Every step forward was a battle against mud, roots, wind, and rain, but also against the supernatural pull, tugging at their minds, whispering submission. Mark swung his branch again, striking a root. The impact sent a ripple across the clearing, shaking mud and water, and the figure recoiled momentarily. But the forest answered, roots lashing violently, mud surging beneath their feet, branches clawing downward. Thomas felt his legs burning with exertion, lungs heaving, but he forced himself onward. Every step was a test of will, every breath a struggle against fear. The faceless figure advanced steadily, unhurried but inevitable, its void face pressing cold intent into his mind. Emily's voice trembled. It's everywhere. The forest, the fire, it's alive. Sarah's eyes were wide with terror. We can't stop. It will take us. We have to fight and run at the same time. Lightning split the sky, illuminating dozens of more faceless figures emerging from the trees, patient, watching, manipulating shadows that moved independently. The whispers were deafening now, threading into every thought, every fear, every hesitation. Inside, inside, forever, surrender, join us. The group ran blindly, slipping in mud, dodging roots and branches, the firelight reflecting off black voids in the distance. Thomas realized with chilling clarity that this clearing, the fire, the forest, and the figures were all part of a single entity, a predator that used both mind and body, fear and force to break them. The faceless figure lunged again, closer this time. Its fingers grazed Thomas's shoulder, and the cold was immediate, searing, pressing into his chest. The whispers formed words in his own voice. Inside, you cannot resist. Inside, forever. Thomas stumbled, almost falling into a root, but Sarah yanked him upright. "No, keep moving. We fight and run." The forest responded violently. Roots twisted like snakes, branches lashed like whips, mud sucked at their boots. The fire roared higher, blue flames twisting in impossible spirals, casting shadows that moved toward them. And the faceless figure advanced, patient, relentless, inevitable. A predator that didn't need to chase because the forest itself was doing the hunting. The only way out, Thomas realized, was through the chaos, through the fire, through the supernatural snare that had claimed this clearing. And beyond, he feared, there was no promise of safety, only deeper darkness and horrors that had been waiting, patient, eternal, for them to step further into the nightmare. But step forward they must, or be consumed. The clearing had become a living nightmare. Rain pounded their faces, mud pulled at their boots, and every root and branch seemed to lash out with a will of its own. The faceless figure advanced relentlessly, its elongated limbs bending unnaturally, void face pressing cold intent into their minds. Shadows danced violently in the firelight, twisting into forms that seemed to reach for them. The whispers were deafening, threading into their thoughts like iron needles. "Inside, forever, join us, you cannot resist." Thomas gritted his teeth, forcing his legs forward. Emily stumbled, mud sucking at her boots, and he grabbed her arm, dragging her upright. "Keep moving," he shouted over the storm. "We have to get out of this clearing." Mark swung a branch at a lashing root, but it struck only air. The root twisted violently, coiling around his ankle like a snake. He fell to the mud, yelping in pain as the root tightened, pulling him down. The faceless figure glided closer, calm, patient, its void face fixed on him. "Mark!" Sarah screamed, trying to grab him, but the roots pulled him under, dragging him backward. The firelight reflected off the blackness of the figure's form as it extended a long, spindly arm, fingertips grazing Mark's shoulder. Cold radiated from the touch, searing, pressing into his chest like icy chains. Emily screamed, but Thomas yanked her forward. "Go. Don't stop," he shouted, dragging her through the mud. He glanced back and saw the figure's void face turning toward Mark, the roots holding him like a vice. The whispers filled their minds with Mark's voice, distorted and twisted. "Inside, forever, join us. Mark, inside." Sarah's face was pale as she tried to pull Mark free. The roots resisted violently, almost alive, twisting tighter with every tug. The faceless figure hovered closer, limbs bending unnaturally, the cold pressing deeper into Mark's chest. The whispers coalesced into a singular command, threading into Thomas's mind. "Give him to us, give yourself, inside, forever." Thomas's hands shook, but he yanked Emily forward, dragging her over slick mud and under lashing branches. Mark's screams echoed behind them, mixing with the storm, the whispers, and the roar of the unnatural fire. Sarah finally freed Mark's arm, but the figure advanced, patient, its presence a suffocating void pressing against them. The forest responded violently. Roots rose like snakes, branches lashed, and the ground shifted beneath their feet. One root twisted upward beneath Emily's boot, almost throwing her into the mud, but Thomas grabbed her and pulled her upright. Lightning split the sky, revealing the full extent of the clearing. Dozens of faceless figures gliding silently among the trees, patient, waiting, watching. The fire in the center roared higher, blue flames licking the ground, casting grotesque, moving shadows. The forest itself pulsed with intent, bending reality subtly but undeniably, forcing them closer to the center. Mark groaned, blood dripping from his arm where the root had cut him. The faceless figure hovered just inches away, void face fixed on him, limbs curling impossibly. Thomas felt the invisible tug again, stronger than ever, threading into his chest and mind. The whispers became almost unbearable. "Inside, inside, forever, given, join us." Sarah grabbed Thomas and Emily's arms, dragging them forward. "We have to move. Don't stop. If we freeze, it will claim us all." The group stumbled through the mud, branches tearing at their skin, firelight flickering across the twisted roots and shifting shadows. The faceless figure glided silently behind them, patient, inevitable, the void face radiating cold intent that pressed into their very bones. Emily screamed as another root shot up, curling around her ankle. Thomas yanked her free, but the forest resisted at every step. Every movement was a battle, against the mud, the roots, the branches, the cold, the whispers threading into their minds, testing their fear, their resolve. Mark limped, bleeding, but followed. The faceless figure advanced steadily, patient, and the forest itself seemed to bend around it, shaping reality to ensnare them. Thomas realized with bone-deep certainty, the clearing was not just a trap. It was a crucible designed to break them one by one, mind, body, and soul. The whispers intensified, threading into every thought, every heartbeat. Inside, forever, you cannot escape. And in that moment, Thomas understood. The forest, the fire, the lodge, the figures, they were all one entity, a predator that did not need to strike directly because the forest itself hunted, tested, and claimed. The group pressed onward, hearts pounding, lungs burning, mud sucking at their boots, fire roiling at their side, the faceless figure gliding behind them, patient, inevitable, waiting for the next slip, the next falter, the next soul to claim. And the storm pressed down harder, as if to drive them into the center, deeper into the nightmare, where the forest would decide who survived, and who would be claimed first. The clearing had become a living nightmare, a crucible of mud, rain, fire, and shadow. Roots writhed like serpents, twisting beneath their boots and wrapping around ankles, pulling them into the mud. Branches lashed with brutal precision, tearing at their skin and clothing. The faceless figure glided silently behind them, its void face fixed on Thomas, but its presence reached into the others as well, threading into their minds with icy insistence. The whispers were relentless, shouting in their heads. Inside, forever, join, give in, you cannot resist. Emily screamed as a root lashed across her arm. Thomas yanked her free, but another snaked around her leg. Mud sucked at her boots, pulling her backward, and Thomas grabbed her, dragging her forward with every ounce of strength. Mark stumbled, blood dripping from a deep gash on his arm. The faceless figure hovered over him, patient, void face radiating cold intent. The whispers threaded into his thoughts, warping his own voice. Mark, inside, give in, join us. Sarah shouted, grabbing Mark's arm. No, keep moving. Don't stop, no matter what. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the clearing. Shadows twisted violently in the firelight, forming shapes that lunged at them, almost solid, almost alive. More faceless figures emerged from the edges of the trees, gliding silently, patient, waiting for any mistake. The forest pulsed with intent, bending reality subtly but undeniably, pushing the group closer to the center, where the fire roared unnaturally high. Emily tripped, falling into the mud. Thomas lunged, grabbing her arm, but another root whipped out, coiling around his ankle. He stumbled, nearly falling into the fire. Sarah yanked him upright, pulling him and Emily forward, but Mark wasn't so lucky. A root lashed around his leg, pulling him down. The faceless figure hovered, void face inches from him, cold radiating like ice through his chest. Mark screamed, struggling, mud and rain mixing with blood. The whispers coalesced into a chorus. Inside, forever, join, give in, you belong to us. Thomas yanked Emily and Sarah forward. Go. Don't stop. We can't lose him, but we can't stay here. Branches whipped violently, roots twisted tighter, and the firelight flickered, casting grotesque, moving shadows. The forest had become a predator in itself, every step forward a battle, every breath a struggle. Suddenly the clearing seemed to split. A massive tree bent unnaturally, blocking part of the path, roots rising like jagged teeth. Thomas realized with horror that the forest was actively splitting them, forcing them into separate paths. One path led through a narrow, twisting tunnel of roots and branches, a chokehold designed to slow them, trap them, and claim them. The other path led toward the fire, closer to the faceless figure, where the pull of the entity was strongest. Sarah's voice trembled. We have to stick together. We can't split. Emily whimpered, fear breaking through. But it's pulling us apart. We can't fight it all. Thomas knew they had no choice. The forest's intent was undeniable. It would separate them, claim them one by one if they didn't act. He made a split-second decision. Emily, Sarah, follow me. Take the left path through the roots. I'll slow it down. Emily's eyes widened. Thomas, no. But Thomas shoved them forward, gripping their hands. Go. Run. They stumbled into the twisting tunnel of roots and mud, branches scraping their arms, the faceless figure advancing toward Thomas. Its limbs bent impossibly, void face fixed on him, cold intent pressing into his mind. The whispers were deafening, threading into every thought. Inside, forever, join, you cannot escape. Thomas swung his arms wildly, branches lashing back, roots twisting to block him. He felt the invisible tug again, stronger than ever, threading into his chest, pressing against his heart and mind. He realized with chilling clarity, the figure didn't need to touch him to claim him. The forest itself was doing the work, bending reality, twisting paths, forcing him closer to submission. Emily and Sarah's voices echoed ahead, calling his name, urging him to move. He forced his legs forward, mud sucking, roots coiling, branches lashing, every step a battle. The faceless figure glided closer, patient, inevitable, limbs bending around obstacles with unnatural grace. Mark's scream echoed from the other path, muffled but terrifying. He had been caught, almost claimed, and the forest's intent to separate, to isolate, was clear. The fire roared behind Thomas, flames twisting like living serpents, shadows reaching for him, and the whispers promised only one thing: submission, inevitability, the eternal inside. The group pressed on, mud, rain, and blood soaking them, hearts pounding, lungs burning, forest and fire and faceless figure pressing from all sides. Every step forward was survival, every breath a defiance, every heartbeat a challenge to the Forest Lodge entity that hunted them. And Thomas knew with bone-deep certainty that the nightmare was far from over. The forest had chosen its prey, and the hunt would not end until it had claimed them all, or broken them first. The forest had become a living predator. Roots twisted violently beneath their boots, branches lashed with surgical precision, and the mud pulled at their legs like grasping hands. The faceless figure glided silently behind them, void face fixed on Thomas, but its presence pressed into the others as well, threading into their minds, cold and relentless. The whispers screamed in their heads. Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist, you belong to us. Emily stumbled, mud sucking at her boots. Thomas grabbed her arm, pulling her upright. Keep moving, he shouted, lungs burning. Don't stop. Mark limped behind, blood dripping from his shoulder, sweat and rain mixing with mud. He tripped over a root that lashed out from the mud like a serpent. The faceless figure hovered closer, limbs bending impossibly, void face radiating cold intent. The whispers threaded into Mark's thoughts, warping his own voice. Mark, inside, join us. You cannot escape. Suddenly, a root shot up beneath Mark's feet, coiling around his legs like a snake. He fell hard into the mud, screaming as the root tightened, pulling him down. The faceless figure extended a long, impossibly thin arm, fingertips grazing his chest. Cold radiated instantly, searing through him, pressing into his mind like iron chains. Mark! Sarah screamed, trying to grab him, but the root lashed violently, snapping backward and almost pulling her into the mud. Emily's hand slipped from his arm as he was dragged down. The whispers became overwhelming, threading into Thomas's mind. Inside, you cannot resist, you will belong. Thomas felt panic surge, but he forced himself forward. He yanked Emily and Sarah through the mud, branches tearing at their faces, firelight flickering in the unnatural storm. The faceless figure glided behind them patiently, inevitable, limbs bending around roots and branches to reach closer to Mark. Mark's screams echoed, piercing the storm and rain as the root coiled tighter. His hands scrabbled at the mud, fingers clawing desperately, but the forest seemed alive, pressing down on him, forcing him toward the fire. Lightning flashed, illuminating dozens of faceless figures at the edge of the clearing, patient, waiting, watching. Emily gasped. We can't save him, we can't stop it. Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. We have to try. We can't leave him. Thomas hesitated, the pull of the faceless figure tugging at his chest. The whispers became unbearable. Give yourself, give him, inside, forever. But the forest had decided. Mark was already partially claimed, his movements slowing, voice fading into the whispers. The faceless figure hovered above him, limb bent unnaturally, void face pressing into his mind. A chill like death itself radiated from it, freezing Thomas in place. He realized with sick certainty, Mark's mind was already being invaded, his fear weaponized, his will bending toward the forest's control. No! Thomas shouted, lunging, but the forest fought him. Roots lashed violently, branches twisted overhead, mud sucked at his boots, and another figure emerged from the shadows, gliding silently, blocking his path to Mark. Emily screamed. We have to go. He's lost. Thomas looked at Sarah, panic-stricken. We can't just leave him. But the forest had made the decision for them. The fire roared, twisting blue and orange flames like living serpents, shadows reaching toward Mark, threading into his body, mind, and soul. His screams became whispers, then silence, then a low, hollow moan that merged with the cacophony around them. Sarah grabbed Thomas's arm, pulling him through the mud, branches tearing at their clothing, firelight flickering wildly. Emily stumbled, almost falling, but Thomas yanked her upright. They ran blindly, desperate, hearts hammering, lungs burning, but the forest had claimed Mark, partially, completely, whatever remained of him now a tethered prey, bound to the faceless figure and the clearing itself. The whispers echoed in their minds, threading through every thought. Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist. Thomas realized with bone-deep certainty that the clearing was a crucible designed to break them one by one. The forest, the lodge, the fire, the faceless figures, all one entity, patient, eternal, manipulating mind, body, and environment. They pushed onward, mud, rain, and blood soaking them, every step a battle against the forest's intent. The fire roared higher, blue flames twisting like living serpents, shadows lunging independently. The faceless figure hovered at the edge of Thomas's vision, patient, inevitable, waiting for the next mistake. Emily whispered, trembling. Will it come for us? Thomas swallowed, voice shaking. It will. But we have to survive. We have to keep moving. No matter what. The forest pulsed around them, alive, watching, waiting. The storm roared. The fire twisted. And somewhere in the shadows, the faceless figure held Mark, a warning, a tether, a promise. The hunt was far from over. The clearing had claimed its first, but it hungered for more. And the nightmare pressed onward. The forest seemed to pulse around them, breathing with a slow, patient menace. The clearing they had just escaped glowed behind them, the fire still roiling unnaturally, blue and orange flames twisting like serpents. Shadows writhed across the trees, moving independently, forming shapes that seemed to reach for them, coaxing, tempting, threatening. The faceless figure lingered near the fire, watching, patient, but Thomas knew it was not retreating, it was waiting. Waiting for the next opportunity to strike. Is Mark? Emily's voice trembled, almost swallowed by the storm. Is he gone? Sarah shook her head, tears mingling with rain on her cheeks. The forest, it's claimed him. Part of him, it's inside the clearing now. We can't stop it. We can't help him. Not now. Thomas swallowed hard, mud squelching beneath his boots. The whispers lingered in his mind, not as loud as in the clearing, but insidious, threading through every thought. Inside, forever, join, you cannot escape. The rain pounded relentlessly, cold and heavy, soaking them to the bone. Every step through the mud was a battle. Every branch seemed to reach out to trip or slash them. The forest was alive in ways that defied logic, twisting paths, bending reality subtly but unmistakably. Even the sound of their own footsteps seemed wrong, echoing from multiple directions, multiplying their fear. Keep moving, Thomas shouted. We can't stop. It will. A sudden crack of thunder interrupted him. Lightning illuminated the trees ahead. In the distance, a new glow shimmered faintly through the rain and mist. It wasn't fire this time, not exactly. The light was softer, eerie, a pale greenish hue that flickered like it had a heartbeat. Emily shivered. What is that? I don't know, Thomas admitted, voice tight. But it's pulling us, just like the clearing did. We have to be careful. Sarah glanced behind them. The clearing was still visible through the rain and mist, the fire roaring, shadows dancing. She swallowed. It's bait. I can feel it. It's trying to lure us deeper. Thomas nodded. I know, but staying here, waiting will be next. We have to move. The path twisted, roots and branches forming a natural corridor, narrowing as they went. The whispers, now quieter, almost seductive, coiled around their thoughts. Come closer, you cannot resist, inside, forever. Emily clutched Thomas's arm. It's inside us already. I can feel it. Focus. Thomas snapped, though his own heart hammered in fear. Step by step. Don't let it control your mind. The forest responded violently. Roots shot up like snakes, coiling around ankles. Branches whipped down from above, tearing at clothing and skin. Mud pulled at boots, trying to hold them in place. And everywhere the pale green light flickered, shadows twisted, forming shapes that lunged for them, reaching, grasping, testing. Keep moving, Sarah urged, voice rising over the storm. Don't look at the light. Just run. They ran blindly, the forest bending around them. Roots and mud became traps, forcing them to stumble, trip, struggle. The green light flickered ahead, beckoning, but Thomas realized with horror that this was a trap just as deadly as the clearing, though different. The forest had learned. The lodge, the faceless figures, the fire, the very trees, they adapted, responded, and hunted with intelligence that was alien and relentless. Suddenly, the ground beneath Emily gave way slightly. She screamed as mud and roots tried to pull her down. Thomas grabbed her hand, yanking her upright. Behind them, shadows darted between the trees, shapes moving with impossible speed, faceless figures gliding silently, patient, watching for the next mistake. "Don't stop," Thomas yelled. "Keep moving." The path narrowed further, forcing them into a twisted corridor of roots and branches. The whispers became personal, threading into their fears, their memories, their thoughts. "You cannot escape. You belong. Give in, inside." Every step forward was agony. Every breath was a battle. Every heartbeat reminded them that the forest was alive, patient, and that the faceless figures were only a part of its will. The storm raged, rain blinding, thunder shaking the ground, firelight and shadows flickering in every direction. Thomas realized with chilling certainty, the forest wanted them to fracture, to panic, to falter. The green light ahead was a new snare, and the faceless figures were the hunters, patient and eternal. They would not stop, but they could not stop either. Not now. Not ever. Through mud, rain, and grasping roots, they pressed forward, deeper into the forest, toward the unknown light, toward whatever nightmare the lodge and the entity had planned next. And the storm, the shadows, and the whispers pressed closer, patient, eternal, unrelenting. The hunt was far from over. The green light flickered ahead, soft yet unervingly steady, as if breathing in rhythm with the forest itself. Rain poured in thick sheets, mixing with the mud beneath their boots, and the storm's roar became almost a voice, whispering through the trees. Shadows twisted, stretched, and folded in impossible angles, their edges shimmering with an unnatural awareness. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. Every step felt like wading through the consciousness of the forest itself. Emily and Sarah stumbled beside him, soaked, trembling, eyes wide with fear. Behind them, the clearing was gone, hidden by a thick wall of fog and mist. The faceless figure they had left behind seemed to glide at the edge of their vision, patient, inevitable, its void face observing, waiting, probing. "Stay close," Thomas shouted over the storm, but even as he said it, his voice faltered. The forest seemed to respond, bending the path before them subtly, twisting it, elongating it. The whispers returned, now personalized, threading directly into their minds. "You are alone. He cannot save you. Inside. Forever." Emily gasped. It's talking to me, in my own voice." Sarah gritted her teeth. "Mine too. It's using our thoughts against us. We have to fight it. Focus." The path narrowed, roots rising like jagged teeth from the mud, branches curling to block escape. The green light flickered ahead, growing brighter, but it was deceptive. As they pressed forward, the forest seemed to warp around them. Branches that had been behind suddenly loomed ahead. Shadows twisted into familiar shapes, glimpses of Mark, glimpses of the lodge, glimpses of themselves, distorted, hollow, and screaming. Thomas's stomach churned. The forest was creating illusions, mirroring their fears and memories, using them as bait. The green light flickered again, forming the outline of a doorway, warm, inviting, almost safe. That's where we have to go," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Thomas said, voice tight. "It's a trap. Don't trust it." But the forest had already begun to act. Roots surged from the mud, coiling around Emily's legs, pulling her backward. Shadows elongated, reaching for Sarah's arms, twisting and warping her vision. Panic rose like a tide, and Thomas realized the forest was separating them deliberately, using fear and illusion to fracture their unity. "Emily," Thomas shouted, yanking at the root. It tightened, resisting, dragging her closer to the green light. The whispers intensified. "Come, inside, forever, surrender." Sarah screamed, lunging toward Emily, but another illusion appeared. A duplicate of Thomas, emerging from the shadows, faceless, reaching for Emily. Sarah froze, heart hammering. The forest had made her see him as a threat, a predator, twisting reality around her mind. "No," Thomas roared, struggling against the roots. "It's not real. Keep moving, don't stop." Emily screamed, the root tightening like a vice. She reached for Thomas, eyes wide, trusting him, but the forest distorted her perception. The faceless figure glided silently at the edge of the green light, observing, waiting, patient. Lightning split the sky, illuminating dozens of faceless figures in the periphery. They hovered, silent, shadowed, watching as the forest manipulated reality. Branches lashed violently, roots coiled, mud sucked at their boots. Every direction seemed wrong, every step uncertain. Thomas realized the horrifying truth. The forest did not need to kill them directly. It could break them first, separate them, warp their minds, and claim them without touching them. Emily's grip tightened on his arm as she struggled against the roots. Sarah's voice cracked with terror, yelling at illusions that weren't there, seeing shadows that didn't exist. Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist. Thomas forced his legs forward, heart pounding, lungs burning. Every step was a battle, against mud, rain, roots, branches, the storm, the whispers, and the illusions that the forest wove around them. The green light flickered, beckoning, but he knew that following it blindly would be their undoing. And then it happened. A root lashed violently at Thomas, striking his shoulder and throwing him off balance. In the split second he stumbled, Emily was yanked forward by another root, screaming. Sarah lunged to grab her, but Thomas caught only the empty sleeve of her jacket as the illusionary green doorway shimmered, twisted, and pulled Emily into its glow. No! Thomas shouted, panic rising in his chest. Emily! The forest hummed, whispered, and the green light pulsed like a heartbeat. The faceless figure hovered nearby, void face still fixed on him, patient, inevitable. Thomas realized he was alone now, partially separated, partially trapped, and forced to navigate a forest that could warp reality, twist minds, and manipulate every sense. The whispers continued, softer now, almost coaxing. Alone, inside, forever, join us. Thomas's chest burned, every nerve screaming. He forced his legs forward, moving deeper into the storm, deeper into the illusions, knowing that the forest had claimed Emily, and that every step ahead would demand more courage, more will, more resistance, if he hoped to survive and find her again. And as the storm raged, the forest pulsed with life and intent, patient, eternal, and far from finished. The nightmare had grown worse, and the hunt was far from over. Thomas stumbled through the rain-soaked forest, mud sucking at his boots, branches tearing at his soaked clothes, heart hammering like a war drum. Emily had been pulled into the green light's illusion, and Sarah was just a step behind him, sobbing quietly, terrified and trembling. Every nerve in Thomas's body screamed danger. Every instinct told him the forest was not just alive, it was thinking, hunting, shaping reality itself. A pale green glow flickered ahead, soft, almost hypnotic. Thomas froze. The light was not the doorway that had claimed Emily, but something worse. In the center of a small clearing, framed by twisted roots and dripping branches, was a mirror. Its surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the forest around it, but the reflection was wrong. It was warped, twisted, and alive. Thomas took a cautious step forward. In the mirror he saw himself, but not as he was. His reflection's voided eyes stared back at him, empty and endless, a cold grin stretching across a face that was his own but not. The reflection lifted its hand, and Thomas's arm moved in exact synchrony, though his body refused to obey. Inside, forever, join, give in. The whispers returned, threading directly into his mind, speaking in his own voice. Thomas staggered back. No, this isn't real. But the mirror pulsed with intent. Shadows emerged from its surface, twisting into shapes that lunged toward him. Branches bent unnaturally, reaching for him, roots shot from the mud like serpents, and the storm's rain became a curtain of pressure, pushing him toward the mirror. The faceless figure lurked at the edge of the clearing, limbs bending impossibly, void face fixed on him, patient, inevitable. Sarah screamed. Thomas, don't go. Don't look at it. Thomas shook his head violently. I have to. I need to know what it is, how to survive. The mirror's reflection spoke without lips. His own distorted voice echoed in the air around him. You cannot resist, inside, forever, you belong, join us. Thomas clenched his fists. Every muscle screamed with resistance, every nerve burned. He realized the mirror was not just a trap, it was a weapon against his mind. It forced him to confront his fear, his guilt, and his terror all at once. His reflection reached toward him, fingers curling like claws. The branches and roots of the clearing twisted in sync, bending reality to trap him. Emily's voice echoed faintly, carried through the rain, almost a memory. Thomas, you have to fight. You can't give in. Thomas's heart surged. He shook his head, stepping back, but the ground betrayed him. Roots twisted beneath his boots, tripping him. Mud sucked at his legs, dragging him forward. The mirror pulsed with light, brighter and brighter, and Thomas felt the cold tug of the faceless figure threading into his chest, pressing into his heart, trying to bend his will. Inside, join, give in. He fell to one knee, shaking, mind spinning, visions of Emily trapped in the green light, Mark lost to the clearing, and the faceless figure looming over him. The whispers became a chorus of every fear he had ever known. Failure, loss, submission. But deep in his chest, something burned. Resolve. Determination. He gritted his teeth, yanking his hand from the mirror's reflection, forcing his mind to focus. "No," he shouted. I will not give in." The mirror cracked. The reflection shrieked silently, a soundless scream of rage and hunger, and the shadows recoiled. Roots twisted violently, flinging mud and debris, but Thomas scrambled to his feet, chest heaving, lungs burning, heart pounding. The faceless figure lingered at the edge, observing, patient, but it did not strike. For now the forest had tested him, and he had survived. Sarah ran to his side, shaking. "Thomas, are you okay? That thing, it tried to pull you in?" Thomas nodded, still gasping. It's testing us, the forest, the lodge, everything. It's alive and it's learning. We can't stop. We have to keep moving, find Emily, find Mark, survive." The storm raged on, rain beating down, lightning illuminating the twisted forest. Shadows stretched unnaturally, the green light pulsing faintly in the distance, and the whispers lingered, softer now, patient, waiting for the next opportunity. "Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist." Thomas shook his head, forcing his fear down. The mirror lay cracked, pulsing with residual energy, a warning and a lesson. The forest had tested him, and he had resisted. But he knew the trials would not end. Not while the faceless figures in the lodge's dark intent lingered. They had survived another trap, but the hunt pressed onward, deeper into the forest, where the storm, the whispers, and the shadows would grow even more relentless. And Thomas knew with bone-deep certainty that the nightmare was far from over. The rain never ceased. It hammered down relentlessly, soaking Thomas and Sarah to the bone, washing mud into their eyes, numbing their fingers and toes. Every step through the forest was a battle, the mud pulling at their boots, roots twisting beneath their feet, branches slashing at their arms. And all around them the forest was alive, pulsating, breathing, watching. The faceless figure had not left. Its void face followed them from the shadows, limbs bending unnaturally, gliding silently, patient, inevitable. But now the forest itself began to act in more insidious ways. The green light they had seen before flickered ahead, but it was fragmented, splitting into multiple flickers across the trees, each pulse of light a lure, a bait, a trap. Thomas stumbled over a hidden root. Lightning illuminated a figure in the distance. Emily, trapped in a faint, distorted green glow. Relief surged for a fraction of a second before terror crashed down. It wasn't Emily. Not really. It was an illusion. Her face twisted, voided eyes staring through him, mouth moving soundlessly, begging and screaming at once. "Inside, forever, join, you cannot escape." Thomas's head spun. The whispers threaded into his mind, faster, sharper, individualized. Every flicker of light became a doorway, every shadow a potential threat. The forest had learned to fracture them, to test them individually, to force panic and submission. "Thomas!" Sarah screamed. He looked to see multiple versions of her emerging from the mist, distorted, hollow, beckoning him into separate directions. His stomach lurched. The forest was splitting them. Already the mud was working against them, roots twisting beneath their boots to push them apart. He grabbed Sarah's arm. "We stay together," he shouted over the storm. "No matter what, we stay together." One of the shadow Sarah stepped forward, reaching with impossibly long arms, whispering his own thoughts back at him. "You cannot save her, you will lose, inside, forever." Thomas shook his head violently. "No, that's not real. Keep moving. Follow me." The illusions intensified. One after another, distorted versions of Mark, Emily, Sarah appeared, screaming, crying, or silently staring with voided eyes. Roots coiled around their ankles, lashing branches forced them apart, mud sucked at their boots like grasping hands. Thomas yanked Sarah forward, trying to ignore the figures and flickering green lights. "Inside, forever, you belong, surrender." The forest pressed closer, and the storm seemed to bend reality. Rain fell horizontally, lightning illuminated figures that weren't there, and shadows danced across trees with impossible speed. Thomas realized with a jolt, this was more than a test. It was a hunt. The forest, the faceless figures, the lodge, all one entity, and it was learning, adapting, hunting each of them individually. Suddenly, a flicker of green light pulled at Sarah's attention. Her face twisted in terror. "That's Emily. She's there." Thomas grabbed her arm. "No, it's not real. Don't go." But Sarah wrenched free. The illusion was too strong, pulling her into the green glow. Thomas lunged, but the ground betrayed him. Roots shot up, tangling his legs, pulling him down. His scream echoed through the storm, mixed with Sarah's panicked shouts. He struggled upright, mud sliding down his arms. His heart pounded as more illusions appeared, surrounding him in every direction. Emily screaming from one flicker of light, Sarah calling from another, Mark's voice echoing in the mist. He could feel the pull on his mind, threading into his thoughts, warping reality, whispering promises of submission, despair, and inevitability. Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist. Thomas gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus, to ignore the illusions, the whispers, the flickering lights. No, he shouted. None of this is real. Focus, follow me, stick together. But the forest was relentless. Every step forward was met with new illusions, more roots, sharper branches, more twisted shadows. The faceless figure hovered nearby, void face fixed on him, patient, observing, testing. Its limbs bent impossibly around obstacles, always moving closer, always waiting. Thomas realized with chilling certainty. The forest was designed to break them individually, to fracture their minds before it claimed their bodies. The illusions preyed on their fear, their guilt, their memories. One mistake, one falter, and the forest would pull them into its green-lit grasp forever. He forced himself to run, dragging mud-caked boots, branches tearing at his arms, heart hammering. He reached for Sarah's hand, finding her finally, shaking and sobbing, her face wet with rain and tears. We have to keep moving, he said, voice raw. She nodded, clinging to him. I won't let go, we can survive this, together. Thomas swallowed, forcing his terror down. The illusions continued, green lights flickering in the mist, shadowy figures lunging and recoiling, the forest alive, patient, unrelenting. But for the moment they had held together. Together, maybe they still had a chance. But Thomas knew with every fiber of his being that the forest would not stop. It would test them again. And next time, the illusions would be stronger, the whispers sharper, the shadows more lethal. The nightmare was far from over, and the hunt was only intensifying. The storm had grown louder, more violent, each raindrop striking like needles against their skin. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the twisted trees and rattling the mud beneath their boots. The forest itself seemed to breathe around them, alive, patient, calculating. Every branch, root, and shadow moved with intent, anticipating their every motion. Thomas and Sarah pressed forward, mud sucking at their feet, branches lashing at their arms. But the illusions had intensified, scattering green light flickers across every path. Dozens of phantom Emilys, Marks, and Sarahs appeared, some screaming, some beckoning, some silently staring with hollow, voided eyes. Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist. The whispers threaded into their minds relentlessly, weaving in their deepest fears and memories. Thomas shook his head violently, forcing himself to focus. Ignore them. None of it is real. Stick together. But the forest was cunning. A twisted root shot up and wrapped around Sarah's ankle, yanking her forward toward a flickering green light. She screamed, tearing at it, but Thomas could do nothing. Another root had coiled around his leg, pulling him backward. The forest had split them again, testing their limits, forcing panic, separation, despair. Thomas. Sarah shouted, voice breaking. Don't leave me. I won't. Thomas yelled, struggling against the root, mud sucking him down. Fight it. Don't let it take you. The green light flickered ahead, forming the semblance of a lodge, warped, impossible, glowing softly as if welcoming them. Shadows moved along its walls, twisting, bending, forming faceless figures that glided silently, observing, waiting, patient. The illusions were nearly perfect. Emily's voice echoed from inside the lodge. Thomas, come inside, forever. Thomas's chest burned with panic and frustration. The forest was now a labyrinth of traps, illusions, and shifting terrain. Every shadow, every flicker of green light, every movement in the storm could be real, or could be a lure. He knew the faceless figures were learning, adapting, shaping each step of their flight. Suddenly, Sarah was yanked violently toward one of the illusions. Thomas lunged to grab her, but a twisting root shot up, coiling around his arm. Mud and rain slicked the ground, forcing him to stumble. In a single, horrifying instant, Sarah was pulled into a green-lit illusion, disappearing from sight. Her scream echoed, stretched and warped, fading into the storm. No! Thomas shouted, panic surging, heart hammering. Sarah. The forest pulsed around him, almost celebrating. The whispers intensified, now a chorus threading into his thoughts. Alone, you cannot escape. Inside, forever, join us. Branches lashed at his arms, roots tangled around his legs, and mud pulled him downward. Lightning split the sky, illuminating dozens of faceless figures gliding silently between the trees. Each step was agony, each breath a battle against fear, against the forest, against the pull of the illusions and the faceless figures. Thomas forced himself forward, dragging mud-caked boots, shaking from head to toe, lungs burning. Every flicker of green light, every shadow, every whisper threatened to break him completely. The lodge-like illusion pulsed, beckoning, promising false safety, promising relief, but Thomas knew better. Inside, forever, surrender, you belong. He swallowed hard, teeth gritted, forcing himself to keep moving. He called out, his voice raw, "Sarah, Emily, Mark, I won't leave you." The forest responded with a violent surge. Roots shot up like serpents, coiling around his legs, branches lashed at his arms, and shadows twisted to block every path. The green lights pulsed, creating multiple paths, each one a trap, each one a potential death sentence. Thomas realized with bone-deep certainty, if he made a single misstep, the forest would claim him as it had claimed the others. The faceless figures moved closer, silent, patient, inevitable. Their void faces seemed to pierce his mind, probing, testing, weighing his will. The storm roared, rain pouring like rivers, wind whipping through the trees like sharp blades. Every step was a battle not just for survival, but for sanity. Thomas forced himself onward, each movement deliberate, resisting the pull of the illusions, ignoring the whispers threading into his thoughts. But he knew the forest was relentless. It would not stop. It would not relent. And soon, the green-lit illusions would begin to converge, bringing him closer to the faceless figures and their ultimate claim. The nightmare was nearly complete, and the hunt was about to reach its most terrifying stage. Thomas stumbled through the relentless storm, mud sucking at his boots, rain blinding his eyes, every branch tearing at his arms. His lungs burned, his chest ached, and his heart pounded like a war drum. The forest around him was alive, every tree and root pulsing with intent. Shadows twisted unnaturally, the green light flickering in multiple directions, each one a trap. The faceless figures were everywhere, gliding silently between the trees, patient, inevitable void faces fixed on him, watching, testing, probing. He forced himself forward, every step a battle against fear, mud, roots, branches, and the storm itself. The whispers filled his mind, faster now, sharper, each one a dagger to his sanity. Inside, forever, join, surrender, you cannot resist. Thomas gritted his teeth. "No," he shouted, voice raw. I will not give in." A sudden flash of lightning illuminated a massive structure ahead, the lodge. But it was not the lodge they had arrived at. It had been transformed, warped by the forest, twisted and alive. Its walls pulsed as if breathing. Windows flickered with green light, shadows dancing inside, reaching outward. The air smelled of burning wood and wet earth, mixed with something metallic and wrong. He could hear faint screams echoing from within, Emily, Sarah, Mark, or their illusions he could not tell. The forest had fractured them completely, separating reality from deception, forcing every nerve, every thought, every heartbeat into a desperate fight for survival. Thomas swallowed hard, mud dripping down his face, water running into his eyes. The lodge beckoned, a promise of answers or death. And he knew the faceless figures were waiting, patient, inevitable, for the moment he would falter. Inside, forever, you belong, join us. Thomas stepped forward, dragging his feet through the mud, shaking from head to toe. Roots twisted violently, trying to pull him down, but he forced himself upright. Branches lashed at his arms and face, but he ignored them. His mind screamed, whispering doubts, fears, visions of Emily and Sarah trapped in green light, Mark lost forever in the clearing. But Thomas forced himself onward. As he reached the lodge, the air shifted. The shadows around him condensed, forming shapes. Dozens of faceless figures, limbs bending impossibly, gliding silently toward him. The whispers became a chorus, threading into every thought, promising despair, surrender, death. He stepped into the lodge. Inside, the space was impossible. The walls stretched, twisted, and the ceiling pulsed with an unnatural heartbeat. The floor was mud and roots, yet seemed solid. Green light flickered from every corner, creating illusions of Emily, Sarah, and Mark, screaming, begging, accusing. Thomas's chest ached. He knew some were real, some were not, and he could not tell the difference. Inside, forever, join, you cannot resist. Thomas forced his mind to focus. He gritted his teeth and shouted, I will not give in. I will survive. I will find them. The faceless figures surged forward, but the lodge responded. Roots from the floor twisted like serpents, pulling the figures back. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming a barrier. The green light pulsed, feeding on fear, feeding on whispers, but Thomas pressed on, following the strongest thread of hope, Emily's voice, real and faint, calling to him. He ran through the twisted corridors, dodging branches and illusions, mud sucking at his boots, the storm outside echoing in the lodge. Each step tested his sanity. The whispers threatened to drown him, the faceless figures tried to invade his mind, and visions of the forest itself clawed at his resolve. Finally, he reached a massive hall. In the center, a green pool of liquid light swirled, shadows and faceless figures hovering around it. Emily, Sarah, and Mark were trapped inside, twisted by illusions but alive, reaching out toward him. The faceless figures pressed closer, void faces glimmering, and the forest itself seemed to pulse, alive, waiting for the moment to claim him. Thomas took a deep breath, heart hammering, and shouted, "I am not yours." The forest roared in response. The pool of green light pulsed violently. Roots surged from the floor, branches lashed from the walls, and the faceless figures lunged. But Thomas focused. He reached toward Emily first, grabbing her hand. The illusions around her shrieked, twisting, trying to pull her away, but he held fast. Then Sarah, then Mark. One by one, he pulled them toward him, forcing reality through sheer will, shaking off the whispers, resisting the faceless figures, the illusions, the green light, and the storm. The forest fought, thrashing violently, but Thomas's determination burned brighter. "Not yours, not forever, survive," he whispered to himself, repeating it like a mantra. The lodge shook, shadows twisted and writhed, green light pulsed faster, and the storm outside screamed, but Thomas held them together, one step at a time. Finally, he reached the exit, the lodge's warped door. Lightning illuminated the forest outside, the rain pounding down. Roots tried to pull them back, branches lashed, and the faceless figures hovered at the edge, waiting, patient, inevitable. Thomas dragged Emily, Sarah, and Mark through the doorway, mud slipping under their feet, branches tearing at their backs. They stumbled into the forest outside. The storm raged, but the lodge behind them quivered, the green light dimming, the faceless figures retreating into shadows. The forest pulsed once, twice, then seemed to pause, waiting. They were free for now. Thomas sank to his knees, chest heaving, mud and rain soaking them, hearts pounding. Emily leaned against him, shaking. Sarah clutched his arm, tears streaming down her face. Mark was silent, staring into the forest, face pale, voided eyes flickering with residual fear. The whispers lingered faintly, a reminder that the forest was patient, eternal, and watching. The storm continued to rage, branches creaked, roots twisted, but they had survived. Together. For now. The forest had claimed fear, shadows, illusions, and whispers. But it had not claimed their will. Thomas knew the nightmare was far from over, but they had survived the hunt. And in that survival there was hope. The hunt was over. Or at least, for now.